But that's really weird. See, we're sitting here. He's actually not sitting there. He's sitting here, and I'm sitting over there. And let's do the mandatory. Can you all hear us from rainy Verdon? You probably play an instrument. I don't know why we're starting with a musical question. Do you play an instrument?
Play an instrument?
You would.
I tickle my cat's tummy to make him purr.
We're going to call that a no. Anyway, all right, outstanding. I wanted you all to meet Rogers here because you have all, of course, seen and memorized the first episode of Great Forts that we did out here from the Fort of Douaumont. And you were going to see a whole lot more of you and me running around the various battlefields of Verdon. And that's going to be fun, especially today. We did this wonderful first filming in the rain. Like a lot of rain.
Under an umbrella.
Under an umbrella. So I will hear no complaints about sound. I don't know how to edit raindrops out. I don't think that's going to happen. But what I wanted you guys to all, hey guys. So hello, there's someone from Wales. That's near where you were from, isn't it?
Yes.
So how did you end up being a British-like historian in here in France?
Well, near my hometown of Swansea, where I was born, within a 30 or 40-minute drive, I could visit a dozen historical medieval castles and 2 Roman forts. So I grew up as a kind of a fortress freak, if you like, a history freak. And I've been interested in history since.
No, just wave your hands in front of the camera. You can't see your face.
Ah, right, okay.
I mean, the moneymakers.
Yeah, but you see, being in France, the French express themselves with their hands, so I picked up that habit.
Well, don't block your face. It's bad camera work.
Oh, right.
For a laptop in the rain in Verdon.
Right.
We're working on this. So you ended up and how will you wrote a bunch of books before you got here, or how did that work?
No. I translated some books before I came here, but then I decided to sit down and, in the peace of the countryside, the Verdun, du Noir countryside, to write my own books. I continued my translation work, but book writing is my favorite thing.
And that's one of the things I wanted to. Now, you guys were talking a little bit about when I said the X1, and one of you guys said, well, this was about the British Navy's attempt to sink. That's not it. So you want to tell them a little bit about the X1, because that's something most of you probably haven't heard about. And we will talk a little bit about a whole lot of World War II and war and experimental, because he's been around for a few years more than me. He knows a bunch of stuff. But what was the X1? How did that's his thing.
Well, let me quickly tell you how I got involved in writing a book on the X1. I wanted my oldest son to be interested in history. So one day the idea came into my head, Submarine X1. I don't know why, these things happen. I took him down to the Submarine Museum in Gosport. I asked the very helpful young ladies there to give us any information they had on the X1. They came out with a huge pile of cardboard boxes full of documents stamped in red, top secret.
That doesn't happen
And we
anymore.
sat down and we read through these and we were fascinated. And there were photo galleries of this beautiful photogenic submarine. We were fascinated. And when we walked out and we thanked the girls, they said, Roger, you absolutely must write a book on the X1 because she was so beautiful. And I said, yes, you're right. She was a real beauty. And it took me a few years to gather enough information on her and make a load of research. And when I came here to France, I sat down and I wrote the book on the X1. I was very pleased with it.
So what was the X1? Because this was not just a little thing.
Largest submarine in the world, the deepest diving, with some armor plate on the upper hull, or at least very thick steel, and 2 twin power-operated gun turrets that were watertight at what? Did she go down to about 350 feet?
This was after World War I, before World War II.
After World War I. The Admiralty were very impressed by the German U cruisers with their twin or the two single 5.9-inch guns, and they thought this might be a very good weapon to use against convoys, especially escorted convoys. So they decided to build an underwater cruiser. They were also studying other means of expanding the Royal Navy. They had the M1 Monitor with the 12-inch ex-battleship gun for shore bombardment. They had the M2, which was a seaplane carrier. They had the M3, which was a gigantic, converted from a bombardment vessel into a gigantic mine layer. And the X1 would then be the cruiser.
And this wasn't about torpedoes. This was literally a underwater battleship gun platform.
It's gunpowder. The idea was that she could take on an escorted convoy single-handed and sink all the escorts, and then move on to sink all the merchant ships or the
with her
troop
cannons,
ships with her guns.
with the twin-mounted cannons.
Yep, two twin 5.2-inch semi-auto gun turrets. Incredible thing, absolutely incredible. Now, the main problem with the X1, if I can explain the political background, why she was what should we say, the black sheep of the Royal Navy, or the, I don't know. Yeah, it was difficult to get one of the parts of the services to adopt her. The main reason was, at the Washington negotiations at the end of World War I, the British tried to get the submarine outlawed as a weapon of war. British admirals had said that any submariner that he caught should be shot as pirates.
And this is at the same time when they're building the biggest submarine in the world themselves.
Yeah, well,
that's
so
a problem.
They built this Corsair raider to take on and sink, single-handed, entire convoys of ships. The time when the Royal Navy, the British government was trying to stop people attacking convoys of merchant ships. And when the diplomats got home, they were horrified at what the Royal Navy had done. So they tried to hide her away. There was a great scandal over the launch, which was supposed to be held in secret. A dockyard worker from Chatham, he actually, with a tiny box Brownie camera, he heard that they were going to launch the submarine. He'd worked on it, I think, or around it. So he went to down to the riverside and took a photo from a long distance away. You could just see this tiny little cigar-like thing sliding into the water. And it was published in a left-wing newspaper of the time the next morning. And all hell broke out. The police were sent around to confiscate all the copies of the newspaper. The printing plates have ended up in the National Archives. And I found them. You had actually the little printing plates, the tiny little thing. And they had, not Photoshop, they had modified the pictures so dramatically, you had no clue as to what it was. But this was going to be a new, gigantic submarine killer thing, the biggest in the world. And the government panicked. And so they kept her under wraps for a long time. X for secret, X for experimental. So she was a first in lots of ways. She had 4 diesel engines that you could couple together, 2 gigantic Admiralty diesel engines, and 2 that they had taken from an ex-German U-boat that had made it across the Atlantic and back a couple of times. So they thought at least those would be reliable. Boy, were they wrong. They just broke to pieces all the time.
So they had 2 different manufacturers of submarines, of engines.
Yeah, 2 different types of engines.
I couldn't see what would go wrong there.
Well, especially using U-boat engines that already crossed over to the States 2 or 3 times. Okay, so you could couple them all together. The idea was that if you combine the power of the 4 diesel engines, she could chase down any merchant ship, any troop ship, run them down and sink them. But how to deal with the escort vessels? Well, that's where the hunter-killer aspect comes in. She was the first submarine designed as a hunter-killer. The British Navy had fitted sonar to one of the H-class as an afterthought and experimented with it. But with the X1, they had hydrophones to find out, yes, there's a convoy somewhere in the neighborhood. They then used their multi-phase sonar to ping on an enemy escort vessel. I mean, they'd know from the hydrophones, which was the fast revving screws of a destroyer. they would ping on the escort vessel while listening on another frequency to whether she was pinging at them, on them.
Oh, really?
This was in 1923.
1923.
Yeah. Then when she got close enough, she would raise her 9-foot horizontal rangefinder on a big periscope, and they would feed back the range details into the mechanical computer. So they knew the enemy, the size of the enemy's course, the enemy's speed, and the exact range to the enemy ship itself. The leading escort vessel, which if you're thinking about a Japanese convoy, traditionally the Japanese Navy gave the escort jobs to the second-class destroyers.
Yeah.
And the second-class crews as well.
Yeah.
Right? Second line of crew. So she would be facing a destroyer with one single 4.7-inch manually loaded gun in the bow, which would turn towards her the moment she started surfacing.
And she would show up with 4 cannons.
And she had 4 cannons, which were already ranged precisely on the enemy destroyer.
Now the rangefinder, that whole range finding from underwater, is it? That
underwater.
How did that work?
Well, the sealing the thing was the main problem, but they had a big. Now, the funny thing about the Barents Stroud rangefinder was, you can find. I found a drawing of the optics at the base, but when you look for a drawing of the actual prototype 9-foot horizontal rangefinder for use underwater, you will never find it. Only by luck, only by chance. You will find it by looking for something else. And there's a very simple reason to that. The Japanese naval attaché who was sent to Barents Stroud's factory to buy rangefinders was a certain Yamamoto. And he had an office in the factory.
And the Japanese were allied with the British after World War I.
Yes, but we were already looking at fighting with the Japanese in the Pacific.
I usually had made underwater rangefinder.
Yeah, it's incredible. So Yamamoto, if he'd wandered around the office, he'd have come across the blueprints of this big secret. So they've hidden the blueprints away under something else. I don't know. There'd be a code name for it, or
because you had a writing the book, you practically couldn't find any pictures of this thing.
You can't find a drawing of the actual rangefinder body itself.
I mean, there's a submarine. You can practically find any photos of it.
I've got full plans of the submarine. They're in the Greenwich Naval Museum. They're about 3'6" long. Incredible things. There are plenty of photos of the outside. She's very photogenic, but because she was a secret weapon, there are no photos which survive of the inside. We think some may have been taken, but a load of glass plates in Chatham Dockyard, they were kept in a shed, and they were all destroyed to make room for a bicycle shed. So if there were any photos ever taken of the interior of this top secret weapon, they've been lost forever. They smashed the glass plates. Now, the only photo we have of the inside is of a mock-up of her control room, showing where all the controls and the periscope standards were going to be fixed. That's all we have, a mock-up, a photo of a mock-up.
You got to tell them how this thing would sight its guns from underwater.
Oh yes, very quickly though. I must add that one of my contacts, by chance, he found in the dustbin in the Submarine Museum a book they were throwing away from their library, which is all the interior fittings of the X-1. Everything, every dial, every switch, every lever, every pipe connection, everything they ever fitted inside this monster submarine. They threw it in the bin and he saved it. And then, armed with the 3'6" long plans of the ship, he has made a series of the most amazing drawings of the interior. They're pen and ink drawings. And you can see the officers' wardroom. You can see the captain's cabin. The officers have their typewriter, their little telephone, all the home luxuries. It's fantastic. So drawings of the engine rooms, the 6-bow torpedo tubes.
And the only photos the government took, they sort of chucked in the bin.
Yep.
That's amazing.
We do have plans we don't have photos. we have plans of Vickers plans of the twin power-operated gun turrets.
Oh, the gun turrets! I just love the idea of the submarine with gun turrets, because that is like sort of a Star Trek fantasy.
Well, yes,
something.
Submarines have deck guns, but
gun
two
turrets.
twin power-operated gun turrets is something else again. Now, right, they've located, they've identified, and they've ranged on a Japanese escort destroyer. So down below, and they feed all that information into the mechanical computer, like the one you can see on HMS Belfast today in London. They turn all the dials. It gives you feed in the speed, your position, enemy position, and it click. It works out where to point the guns and the elevations. And how hot, how what's the temperature, how many times the guns are fired, the temperature of the ammunition. It takes all of that into account.
While the submarine is still submerged.
Just submerged. Then the captain gives the order to surface. Now down below, the gunners who sit at control positions at the base of the ammunition wells, the ammunition trunks, they position the guns. They set their pointers, but the gun turrets are blocked to be watertight. So the moment they break surface, they break the seals on the turrets. They unscrew, it's like a giant tap washer. They have an electric motor which actually unscrews a rubber seal around the trunk, the gun trunk, and then the trunk can turn. And then they match pointers down below. They press the firing buttons. Well, the shells are coming up. The shell comes first, a 70-pound semi-armor piercing shell. It comes, two of them come up. They're for each gun turret. They're thrown onto the loading tray. The cartridge cases come up next because it's semi-fixed ammunition. They're thrown onto the loading tray. The power rammers ram them together into the gun breech. The rammers pivot to one side. The sliding breech blocks shut, and the guns fire.
Fully automatic. They
come back. They eject the cases. And the loading trays swing back into position. You drop the next shells in, you drop the next cartridge cases in, the power rammer rams them, the rammers move out of the way, the tray moves out, and the guns fire.
So does it stay up when it's fired the first shot? So does it?
The submarine?
Yeah.
Now she's on the surface.
She's on the surface now. We're in the...
Right. She turns slightly to bring the stern turret to bear. She's firing 4 shells, salvo after salvo, at this small second-rate Japanese destroyer, which is very quickly put out of action. Yeah, and they practiced for years. They knew what they were doing with their gunnery and their
So how long
torpedoes.
was this in existence? How long did it actually sail? And what do we know of the trials?
Well, they had trials and tribulations with their engines. That was the main problem. They got her to dive deep. They got the gun turret trunks, the revolving gun trunks, to seal. Finally, they got a few leaks in the
having a gun turret that'll actually seal underwater
at 350 feet depth is
that's the thing.
Yeah, it's the deepest diving submarine of her day, about 3,500 tons underwater. Now,
3,500 tons.
Yeah,
that was a big submarine.
Yeah, it's a big sub.
Riveted.
Yeah, some welded. Now, and then that caused a few problems later on with oil leakage from the tanks. Yeah, on the surface. Yeah, what a surprise.
Yeah, that's right.
So she's on the surface. She's knocked out the first enemy destroyer. A second enemy destroyer will come charging up from the stern at about 35 knots. And very quickly, her sonar will pick this up. And the rangefinder will switch to the new target. They'll feed the computer the data. And she'll start firing at the second destroyer. The Japanese commander will come in to ram. It's a surface submarine. He's going to ram a 3,500-ton submarine with his 700-ton destroyer, but he doesn't know that. In he comes boring at full speed, and of course, like the Americans with their shot down the throat of the Torpedo, which they use with great success, she is going to blow this second destroyer out of the water. Now, the convoy they're escorting, imagine it's a troop convoy, the Marus are going to run for it. They're going to split up. They're going to separate. So she clutches in her 4 diesel engines and chases after them at 22 knots. Yes.
Just 22 knots.
22 knots
On the
full
surface?
speed, on the surface, with all 4 engines running. And if they knew there was no surface threat, they could even clutch in the electric motors and start draining their giant batteries to add even more power. Really, Chase? Now, come on, this is the super hunter-killer. That's what she was designed to be.
So what happened to her?
Well, she was an embarrassment to the British government, so they sent her out to the Mediterranean. And nobody out there wanted her. The submariners didn't want her because she was a cruiser, and the surface men didn't want her because she was a submarine. And every so often, her giant Admiralty prototype diesels, straight 8 diesel engines, would break down. They would smash their oil pumps. The drive to the overhead camshaft would come adrift. The bevel gears would wear out. There'd be a catastrophe. She'd come limping in on her U-boat diesels. Or sometimes when they broke down, she'd come limping back home on her electric motors back to Malta, where she was based.
So she still had 2 British and 2 German engines.
And 2 diesel engines. Yeah. And she had 3 means of propulsion. And she needed them all 3 at some time or another.
I sort of want one.
The problem with the U-boat diesel engines was a shock because everybody expected them to be state of the art. But in fact, nobody had taken into account the fact that the Allied blockade had starved the Germans of things like copper and brass. And so, therefore, the U-boat engines had piping made of cast iron.
Oui.
And with the vibration of the diesels, this used to crack and leak.
So where did those engines, the German engines, where did they come from?
They came from a big U-boat.
So they came from a German U-boat.
They came from a German U-boat that had worked and across the Atlantic several times.
Very
second-hand.
Second-hand World War I engine.
But they expected them to work. The Germans do everything fine, and it works in German U-boats, and they didn't really work very well. One of them actually snapped its crankshaft in Malta, and they had to either make up a replacement. I don't know where the hell they would have got one from, or just welded the thing together. They had to do a lot of work on this submarine. Now, the problems with the main engines, her engineering officer, he believes they were caused by the fact that they had bolted the crankshafts directly to the prop shafts. They bolted them together. And this meant that all the vibrations from the props, very long prop shaft, and a long submarine, were fed into the diesel engine, and this caused extra vibration. She would work the engines up to a certain speed range, and then if they tried to exceed that, things would fall off and break. Now, there were ways of fixing that because the engineering officer looked at the German diesels, and he said, well, they have flexible couplings. So if they had fitted flexible couplings to the main engines, they'd have got away with it. They could have gone to full power on them. Yeah. She could never go to full power on her main engines. So in that sense, she was a failure. But then...
It was a fixable failure.
It was a fixable failure because the admiral in charge of submarines at Malta said, look, this vessel is taking up 3/4 of our annual maintenance budget. She's an experimental job. They've landed her on us, and we don't want this. We're going to mend our other submarines.
So she was actually her trials were actual operations. She was sent off to an active command
after her basic trials, speed trials, etc., and diving trials. During her diving trials, they took her down to 350 feet off Gibraltar on the way onto the Med, and the sides of the control room bowed inward slightly, and they said, right, surface, and then they put reinforcing strakes inside. That was the only problem she ever had with diving. She could dive relatively quickly. It was said, yeah, she'd take several minutes to dive. That's all black propaganda. It's black propaganda to stop other people copying the design. She could get under very quickly when she had to. And let's face it, what did she have to escape from? A heavy cruiser, a battleship, a battle cruiser. She could hear them coming from nautical miles away, right? And when she did go on down, she would hunt them with her 6 21-inch bow torpedo tubes.
What was the countermeasures of submarines, of Allied ships at the end of World War I? Acoustic listening? There was acoustic or detection.
Oh, detection, they had hydrophones.
Hydrophones.
Yeah, so she was the first one. The first one designed to use sonar. The H2, I think, I can't remember the H number, actually carried a sonar, a retractable dome, which dropped down beneath the hull. And the X1 carried her sonar dome on the upper hull. So it emerged upwards.
That's
in front of the bow gun turret. And I think the idea behind that was that she was so big and she was going to be sent into uncharted waters to prowl for targets at the Pacific, that she would need to look out for rocks ahead, rocks and reefs. So she would point her sonar would go forward at the best angle, especially if she was diving. Because if she was diving, an underhull sonar is blanked by the bow. If she's diving, we get a slight angle in poorly charted waters.
That was very advanced for that time.
Yeah, they thought it all out. She was a beautiful submarine. She worked exceptionally well. Every time she took part in trials with the Mediterranean fleet, the admirals were furious. They'd be sailing on in a line of battleships, and this bastard X1 would come along and torpedo them with dummy torpedoes, with practice torpedo heads, one after another, and they'd jump up and down with rage that this semi-wreck could blow away half their battle fleet. And that's what she would have done to the Congo class or the Nagato. I could fancy her going up against the Nagato. 6 21-inch torpedoes, please, with active sonar, and the computer working out the ranges, the distance, the speeds. Oh, yeah.
But she was a submarine nobody wanted.
Nobody wanted her, and because of the maintenance problems, they sent her back to the UK, where she languished for a while. She had an engine room fire, which injured 1 or 2 people. Kind of like the black sheep. Nobody wanted her. Nobody wanted to spend any money on her. And then in the dockyard, she got back to the UK. They put her into a dry dock to clean her key, to repaint her for Northern European work.
Yeah.
And the dockyard mateys, they were flooding the dock. The klaxon sounded to go to lunch. They all walked away, and they never noticed that she wasn't properly shored up. And this 3,500-ton submarine fell over on her side.
They sank the submarine.
In the dockyard. Well, they didn't sink her. Some of her tanks were buckled. That's all that happened. Her external tanks were buckled. Mend the things. But no, they didn't want her anymore. So that was the excuse to tow her away to a backwater. And eventually in 1936, this fantastic submarine was scrapped to free up tonnage under one of the naval treaties. Now, what they could have done at the time, they had Vickers diesel engines of 10,000 horsepower. They could have put those in to replace her dodgy prototype Admiralty diesels. They could have thrown away her old U-boat engines and put in 2 standard Admiralty submarine engines from, say, the T class at the time. Yeah. And then they'd have got a 22-knot submarine with 2 twin gun turrets, an active sonar. And they could have, at the same time that they had to open her up, they'd have welded shut her oil tanks.
Welded everything,
Yeah, her ballast tanks.
So what were the lessons learned? Did they take anything away that ended up as something new?
Learned nothing from the X1. Everybody else did. The admiral in charge of the submarine fleet in Malta, he wrote an official memo, which they made sure was leaked to the press, etc. And they said, this gigantic submarine cruiser is a complete failure. The very operational basis for which she was built, she fails. She does not work in any sense at all. And this was black propaganda designed to tell other powers not to copy the British and build another X1.
That's why it was leaked.
They leaked this to the press, and they sat back and they thought, right, we've done our job. We've got rid of giant submarine cruisers. Because the French had been so impressed, they built the Surcouf with the twin 8-inch gun turret, which doesn't really work very well. I mean, the range finder, the guns could fire twice as far as the range finder could tell, but they did have a spotter plane.
It looked kind of cool.
Yes, it looked.
I mean, the French
looked
built
scary.
some really interesting things.
Yeah, they did, like floating hotels. Somebody called it pre-dreadnoughts.
I think that was probably Drachenifeld.
Yes, it is. Yes, when hotels, when floating hotels go to war.
Yes,
it's a fantastic program. You have to watch it. And the tumble homes, which made them roll and make it
tumble. Yeah, well, but the Japanese during World War II had the
giant pagoda.
No, but for submarines, they had the giant 400 with the air.
Yes, you're jumping ahead because the French copied her. They copied the idea of a submarine cruiser, a corsair, and the most famous French corsair was, of course, Monsieur Surcouf. So they gave her the name of the pirate, the privateer. Okay, the Americans built the Nautilus class with two single 6-inch guns.
That was that one.
Yep, and a third one as a mine layer, gigantic mine layer, also with two 6-inch guns. And they were used on the Mackinac Island raid to carry Rangers because they were big ships. Yeah, and they could go long distances. Yeah.
So that was before World War II.
World War II.
So they actually had giant submarines at that time.
They built two submarine cruisers and a mine laying cruiser. Then you have the German Zed Plan, in which raiders...
I'm going to try to pull up a picture of this because I know you guys want to see it.
Yeah. Raider wanted a Type IX, a Type 9, but written IX.
Really?
No, start again. No. Type 11. I'm getting confused by my Latin numbers. A Type X1, XI. You've got X1, the British one, and the German version is XI, the Type 11. Capital X, capital I. And guess what? She's armed with two twin power operated gun turrets. She has armor plating on her upper deck and the conning tower. And she has 4 diesel engines that you can couple together. She also has a completely useless folding float plane, which they craned into a horizontal.
Really?
A vertical tube, sorry.
But the Germans never built it, did they? He didn't get what he wanted later, did he?
Well, World War II intervened, so the Zed Plan was never completed. So the Type XI was never built, but we've got plans of them. We knew exactly what they were going to do.
And they're all sort of inspired. They're all inspired by the X1.
Well, the X1, it's the Type XI with the 2 twin gun turrets, the armor plating on the hull, and the 4 diesel engines coupled together. Come on. And finally, the Japanese. They built very big submarines, long-range submarines armed with 5.5-inch guns, single ones. One that made a transport run to France was armed with a twin 5.5 mounting at the front, at the bow. And they carried planes as well, spotter planes. And one of them attacked the USA, tried to set a forest on fire with incendiary bombs.
And even the Italians, they had a giant submarine.
They had
nothing like that at all.
No. But the Japanese, because they built the aircraft carriers, the I-400s, and there were 2 slightly smaller boats. The idea was to attack Pearl Harbor with their aircraft. Sorry, start again.
Or the Suez Canal.
Yeah,
that was the Japanese.
The Panama Canal.
The Panama Canal.
No. Right, sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Getting carried away, excited about X1. You see, that always happens.
Well, that's why you wrote a book about it.
Yeah. Yes. I get overexcited, and then everything goes haywire. So they were supposed to attack the Panama Canal, firing torpedoes at the lock gates. Well, this is a load of rubbish that would never take place. And so
it wouldn't have worked very long. You blew up
they just amended them. So what the real plan was, and there'll never be any proof of this, is that the U-234, the last U-boat to set up from Kiel, was carrying lead cases full of uranium-235. And halfway across the Atlantic, she received a radio message to call at an American port instead of making for Halifax, which would be her port of surrender, the nearest port. She was carrying 2 Japanese naval officers as well as the lead cases. And when she pulled into the American port, scientists in white overall, complete overall clothing, protective gear, carrying Geiger counters, and boarded her and seized the
Yes.
uranium-235. Someone under the paperclip scheme had spilled the beans that the Japanese were going to receive uranium-235. Now you look back at the I-400 class and you can reevaluate what they were going to do with them. If they had made dirty bombs using uranium, then they could have dropped those on West Coast naval bases and put them out of action for years, not just putting the Panama Canal out of action for...
It did look kind of cool.
Yeah, that's my X1.
That's
what
your
a
X1.
Baby. Yes.
So that's the gun turret right there.
Yeah, the twin gun turrets.
So there's one before and one aft.
Yep. And she had Lewis guns. They were going to put a 2-pounder pom-pom on her as anti-aircraft.
Just because there wasn't enough guns on it.
But anti-aircraft, just because of the limited elevation on the main guns. And an admiral in charge at the time said that's completely useless as an anti-aircraft gun, the 2-pounder. It's completely ineffective. So the British went on to put eight guns together in the pom-pom mountings. They were great for short range work. But moving on from X1 for a moment, when the Japanese attacked the Prince of Wales and the Repulse off Malaya, the ACAC gunners were ordered to only fire at a torpedo plane before it dropped its torpedo. And then after that, the ship's captain would take maneuvering action to avoid the torpedo. And the pom-pom gunners would then open fire on the next torpedo plane coming into attack. But what they found was the Japanese were dropping their torpedoes outside the exploding range of the 2-pounder shells.
Yeah.
So they couldn't engage them at all. So the repulse gunners disobeyed orders and brought down a couple of Japanese planes that overflew them.
If you have to, you have to. I mean,
You have to. Yeah, they did it.
But how much money? How much did this thing cost? Because considering that did they cover it up, or did they just choose to forget it? Was this an actual cover-up of an experimental submarine? We're so used to talking about cover-ups of things here. I thought that was a pertinent question.
Yeah, I think the maintenance costs probably approached the purchase price. I don't think Vickers were very happy because they had designed special wells at their factory to contain the gun trunks that went from the deck down to the bottom of the ship, with the control gear at the
Everything
bottom.
was new. Everything was completely built.
With the turrets on the top, the power operated, the shell hoists and everything, and the gun trunks. Vickers built a special well to build these things, to construct each gun turret. And then the Royal Navy ordered 2 of them instead of a flotilla.
Oh, they actually ordered 2 of them.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
2 gun turrets.
2 gun turrets.
There was an X2 which was proposed with 3 twin gun turrets.
Really?
That would have been very nice. When 2 is good, 3 is
more.
Even better.
I mean, you kind of wonder where would you put?
Behind the conning tower.
Yeah, another.
You'd lengthen her by about 30 or 40 feet and put a 3rd gun turret in.
But
and
again,
then she could take on anything. She could take on a light cruiser. She'd come up and sink it before they knew what was happening. And if anybody fought back, then she just slams them with a salvo of 621 torpedoes. It's a
like
win-win.
It's. I mean, I do kind of get it. It's 2 enormous. This is basically a platform to carry 2 enormous cannon turrets,
and with torpedoes as well.
And it's stupidly expensive. And they still put old used engines in it. Yes. They spent all this money on building this super submarine.
Yes, and they never finished perfecting it.
And then
so X2 was never built, and the number was given to a captured Italian submarine.
Oh, that's what one of you guys talked about.
So there was
that.
an X2, but there's nothing to do with X1. It just uses the.
See, what's really cool about this is right now we have a 19-year-old girl who wants us to rebuild this.
Oh, if only, yeah.
If only.
I don't think I could float her down the River Meuse. She's too big.
We are currently in Verdon, which is we are pretty much surrounded by battlefields. We are surrounded by exploded and unexploded ordnance. Yep. Which, being in your house, I've never been in a house with this much shrapnel.
Well, a shell did hit the roof in September 1918 when the American Army came through here. A 75 millimeter shell went straight through the roof of my house. All the other houses in the village were just sort of literally blown to pieces and to be repaired and rebuilt later. My house stood in a little
the Americans shelled your house.
The Americans shelled my house, and when I looked up the unit that had fired that shell, as you would do, I found it was commanded by a certain Captain Truman, Harry S.
Harry S. Truman shelled your house.
Truman shelled my house, put a hole in the roof. He started his career of mass destruction here and went on to Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
And then we can, it's funny because we walk through all the battlefields and we look at every single fort we get to, there's always the joke that, well, there's a hole that doesn't look like a shell, so it's probably in the Americans post-World War II tested something on it.
Yes, the gun turrets, they put hollow charges on them and tried to make holes in them, ready for getting through the Siegfried line, but they blew up one Garand turret. There's a couple of 75s lying at the bottom of the well. And another fort who needs guns would really like to go in with a crane and lift those out.
You'd be surprised at how many forts out here still have guns and bits and pieces in there.
Yes.
But yeah, well, it's the American way. We blow things up.
Yeah.
What was that? What was that Robin Williams to say? If we can't fuck it, we'll kill it. Was that? I think that was Robin Williams.
But
we spend more time quoting Blackadder here.
My ex-mother-in-law, the mother of my French girlfriend, she actually saw Patton one day. She was living in Pompey as a young girl, and she heard this terrific ruckus going on. After the Americans had bombed everything, half the town was destroyed, lots of people killed. And all the bridges across the Moselle were blown up by the Americans. For once, they actually hit the bridges. And so she heard this terrific row going on. She went outside and asked an American soldier what the hell was going on. And said, who was this guy standing on top of a big bridge structure, like a mobile bridge, floating bridge, yelling insults and swearing at the top of his voice at all his men? And the answer, oh yeah, that's General Patton. So he actually saw and heard him in action.
George Carlin. Oh, I mean, yes, thank you. We do a lot of Blackadder. And especially if you walk the battle of the World War I battlefields, it's since the last one of Blackadder's was Blackadder goes forth in the World War I. Yeah. You have to do this with humor.
But there's humor, but there's also irony.
Irony, like metally is bronzy, but it rusts.
No. You can't take a compass onto the battlefield of Verdun. The needle will spin. They fired 60 million shells over 300 days and nights of combat. And most of those exploded. Even the ones that didn't explode, they're still lying under the ground, upsetting your compass. Like the one we saw today with the detonator on, with the fuse on. Yeah, and I had to wonder whether it was still filled with explosives. I wanted to hit it with my shovel just to see, but he thought that was a bad idea. No, very bad idea. And there were enough holes in that fort already. There's a lot of holes. But that's the unfair thing about when you say the battlefield of Verdun. Well, there wasn't one battlefield. Everything was a battlefield. There were 42 individual combat zones. So when they gathered together all the bones from those 42 combat zones to put them into the ossuary, when they were planting the memorial forest, they kept finding millions of pieces of human beings smashed to bits. They have 42 individual tombs, each tomb representing the human remains found in 42 combat zones. And it's not a very big battlefield, is it? Verdun was 23,000 people. It's a gorgeous town. The countryside just looks like a cheese. Yeah, still. Yeah, we have 23,000 inhabitants today if you count in all the suburbs and the military garrison, the Chasseur de Lorraine. So you have far more dead people than alive people here. Yeah. But before the First World War, there were 25,000 in the military garrison, plus the civilians. And the Germans almost made it in World War I in Verdun. They almost took Verdun to begin with. How did it go? Yeah, the fort we visited today, Troyon, the Germans tried to cut off Verdun. It was in a kind of a salient to the north of the frontier. And they tried to cut it off by capturing a fort to the south and then spinning around to the north and encircling Verdun. Verdun would probably, in 1914, have fallen eventually after a siege. and the city would have survived. It wouldn't have been ruined. You know, when they'd run out of food and ammunition, they had plenty of water flowing through. But they run out of food and ammunition and medicines, they would have to surrender to save the life of the inhabitants.
The French was never going to give up the Verdon. There was actually talk. They were talking about pulling out of the city because it wasn't really strategically important. It was far more. It was more
emotionally, passionately important because of the Treaty of 843 AD, where they broke up the Empire of Charlemagne and divided it between his three grandchildren. One of them got Francia to the west, which later became France. And another one got Germania to the east, which later became Germany. And the third one, Lothar, got the piece in the middle, which said all that's left of that today is Lorraine.
So three countries were born in Verdon.
Three countries were born at Verdun. It's the birthplace of France. And the Germans knew very well that the French, being an emotional, passionate people, would fight to the last soldier and the last cartridge to save the birthplace of their very country.
I was Falkenhayn. He was right.
Yeah, he was right.
He was right.
And his idea was not to go head-to-head with them, but to decoy them into trying to defend Verdun and destroy the French army, bleed it to death with 1,500 cannons and howitzers. It was sighted to the north and northeast of the city. And the German plan nearly worked, except that when they'd blown everything to pieces, the French crawled out of their bunkers. They dragged out their Hotchkiss machine guns into the shell holes, and they stopped the Germans in their tracks.
And that's one of the secret little things that it eventually saved Verdun. But I filmed it today.
Yes.
And I can't, so I don't want to tell you, but you'll see. But
yes.
This is an amazing place. If you have any interest in military history, you have to come to this part of France. And since Metz is only some 60 kilometers away, you have all the German forts at Metz that they built after the Franco-Prussian War, all the way up to the eve of World War I. And then you have 60 kilometers down here, you have all the French forts that they built everywhere. So in this little place, okay, and if you go in Metz and you go 60 kilometers further east, then you have the Siegfried line, or what's left of it, and you have the Maginot line for the next war.
Well, we have a Maginot line here we have two fortresses here in the Meuse.
Yeah, I visited one of them.
Yes,
we did. That was another place where.
Yeah.
I mean, so one thing we never talked about Verdun is at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, Verdun held out almost longer than Paris. Or did they held out longer than Paris? So they had a heroic stand here, which lent to the French love of the city.
They were very proud of holding out for a long time against the Germans. But eventually, obviously, there was no...
But what fortifications were here back in 1870? That there was the citadel?
Pretty rudimentary fortifications all around. There were gun batteries and things on high points, not very much. They didn't start building the fortifications seriously, outside the citadel, that is, until Bismarck seized Alsace and La Moselle, which meant that the German frontier, instead of being a couple of hundred kilometers away, 150 kilometers away, it was now 35 kilometers away to the north. So when you're on the roof of the Forte Duomo, you're staring at the German frontier on the horizon.
Yeah.
And there was nothing to protect France from a surprise attack, which is why they had to build the strong points and the lines of forts.
And there was some 40 forts around here in Verdun.
38 forts and ouvrage. An ouvrage is a smaller work with a barbed wire around it instead of a ditch. It's a technical difference. So all the Maginot fortifications, although they're much bigger than a fort, they're still technically an ouvrage because they don't have a ditch. Except there's some exceptions. They built inside a ditch, but that's okay.
And during World War II, the Germans didn't really destroy a lot of these, did they? I mean, the domes. Here the Maginot Line was sort of.
Oh yeah, well here there was not much fighting going on. We were talking about the 40mm Hotchkiss revolver cannons today. The last time they were used in action was to defend the fort of one of the forts to the south of here. For what? Somebody fired at the Germans with these revolver cannons. They were used.
There was a late 19th century weaponry being shot at the Germans at World War II.
Some very effective stuff.
But the Germans didn't take all the steel from all the domes, from all the cupolas around here, which
they took a lot of them. The only reason that some turrets survived was that they used the forts for storage. So if they'd remove the turrets, there'd just be a big hole in the roof to let the rain in.
Oh yes, there was the one that was hit by that blew up the torpedoes.
Ah, one of the Footsrun nets. Yeah.
There's that one, and there was
Strafed by a P-47. But the pilot saw the Germans loading captured French torpedoes from Cherbourg into trucks. He was on a strafing run coming back from an escort mission. So he dived down on the entrance to the fort and strafed the trucks. The trucks blew up. The explosion went through the tunnels into the fort. The resulting explosion of all the remaining torpedoes blew his P-47 in the air and stopped the engine. He managed just to get it to fire up again before he crashed and flew off, and probably painted a little fort with the swastika on it next to the fighters he shot down or whatever, or the trains.
And the fort literally flipped around the ground. There's a lake there.
There's a lake.
There's nothing left of it.
It's just
speaking of, speaking. So how did you end up in Verdon being a historian here?
Oh dear. Okay. I always wanted to move to France. Ever since my mother announced that we were the descendants of a French aristocrat. I thought, what?
Oh my God, you didn't tell me that.
The Mademoiselle de la Roche, a French aristocrat who had to leave France before the revolution with her brother because of a duel. I think the brother must have, I haven't found any details in any of the archives yet. I still keep looking. I think the brother must have fought a duel to save his sister's honor and probably killed some high-ranking baron or duke or something.
And duels that was a thing. Dueling was a thing.
Flee the country. It was illegal. So they had to run away. They had to escape. So they escaped to Devon, Cornwall and Devon, and the lady married into my mother's family. So I'm a live descendant of a French aristocrat. I tell that to the French. I expect them to,
And I'm descendant of a Prussian aristocrat.
Yes.
How did we end up here?
Birds of a feather flock together.
But that's the fun thing about duels, and I always thought duels were really, really interesting. There's no shortage of films I want to make about dueling, including that you had two people that fought each other because somebody's honor was offended. For some, could be the most trivial, stupid reason that somebody didn't stand up or nod in the right direction, and a duel would be challenged. But there was a period where duels were illegal, and they would go off and they would duel. Remember, 22-23% of the duels were actually fatal. So they would come out with nicks and scratches and hurts and
if you drew blood, then it was over. Or if you even fired at your opponent, you stood your ground and you fired at him.
But they would lie about it afterwards. To the authorities that this
we were out shooting crap.
It was an accident. Even if two people tried to kill each other the day before, and they would sit both in the magistrate's office the next day and say, we were doing something completely different. It is such
testing our new pistols.
I know, and you couldn't. There was rules for dueling. You couldn't issue a duel while you were drunk, while you were it was after dark, or in a tavern. Because you had to be of sound, but you had to be cooling off period, and you'd write letters, courteous letters of requesting someone to apologize for whatever insult they've done, and if they didn't, then the duel would be on. The rules of dueling is just it.
Although another of my ancestors, Sir Richard Grenville, he actually killed somebody outside a pub in London who had insulted him. So it's the slap in the face with the glove. They walked out, they ran outside, he drew his sword and ran it through the guy and killed him. He then had to flee the country to France until he had written to Queen Elizabeth first, asking for pardon so he could actually come back. And then he became an admiral who fought the Spanish Armada, etc. He's another of my ancestors, a different line.
Hang on, and then you came back to France?
The reason why I came to France is that I loved France. I came on several school visits. I came over as a student. I told my mother I loved France. I felt at home. They did strange things. When you were at the petrol station, they were using the manual pump to fill your tank. The guy's Gaulois cigarette was just about to fall from his mouth into the petrol tank. But you just accepted this sort of thing.
That was just how things were done.
Yeah, and I loved all the curious things. I felt I fitted in. I felt at home. And she said, well, that's when she said, well, of course you would, because we're descended from a French aristocrat. Good God. But I loved France. And I came across a website. A young university student was helping her father, a solicitor, to sell houses. When there was an inheritance problem or something. She put together a website, and so I looked at ruins. I looked at houses where there was one big corridor where you entered the front, you went through the living room, you went through the kitchen into the first bedroom. You then carried on through a door into the second bedroom, into the third bedroom. There was no privacy at all. There was another one where the estate agent said, now, then the next thing to look at is the bathroom. And we searched the whole house, and she said, there isn't a bathroom. I said, right, okay, they washed in the sink. So I saw all these ruins at vast prices, and then eventually I came here and I stumbled on this little farmhouse with 4 possible bedrooms. I said, yes. And of course, after living in cities for years where you fight over parking, and if you leave your parking space, you're never sure you can get back to it at night, and then you park around the corner and somebody takes your wheels off, and you got all this stress and worry and struggles. And the stress I have now, yes, the stress I have now is devastating. When I drive back from work, I say, do I leave my car in the courtyard? Oh, hell. Do I put it in the double garage? Oh, I don't know about that. Do I put it in the stable, or do I carry on through to the barn? It takes ages to make up my mind. No, it's straight in the barn.
I can clearly tell we're not done talking about dueling. Yes, and if people they messed up, then the second would have to fight. If one didn't show up or wasn't capacitated. Sometimes the seconds fought too.
Yes.
The second sometimes ended up fighting as well.
Didn't turn up.
Or
yes. He had to, stand up to the honor of his principle. Yeah, it was completely crazy. But of course, a lot of Americans did dueling as well, didn't they?
Lincoln did a duel. Standing in water. Well, one of them.
Well, one American politician killed another one, didn't he? Shot him, killed him. I don't remember who.
Challenged on the floor of the Senate, I believe. Some of those.
Sounds right.
I always thought we should bring dueling back, because it would solve so many more problems.
Well, actually, I had a big argument with someone running a fort.
Did it turn into a duel?
But it was nothing to do with me. It was not my fault. And this guy just lost his cool. There was a misunderstanding. He'd lost his dinner time. And he started screaming at me. He started yelling at my students. He called the teachers names. And I thought, well, do I just push him in the diamond ditch, or do I turn my back? So I turned my back on him in the middle of him screaming.
Oh.
And he phoned my office and said, this bastard, he did this. And I hadn't done it. And my boss came to see me specially. He said, what's going on? I said, well, I must admit, my ancestors, 2 of them killed people in duels. I really, really want to start that up again.
I mean, it was solved so bad.
So satisfying.
Remember 100 years ago when, well, 120 years ago now, when dueling was really outlawed in America, it turned into all the frivolous lawsuits started, because now you couldn't settle your disputes in an honorable way. So you'd start hiring lawyers, despicable way, and suing each other. So all these lawsuits are because you can't duel.
Oh, and the ambulance chasing and the
yes.
I mean,
disgusting. Wouldn't you love it when your insurance company screwed you over, that you could just challenge them to a duel and stab them on a field? I mean, I think that would
be marvelous.
I'm just saying that would probably solve a whole lot of problems.
Yes, they wouldn't. Yeah, it might get rid of a load of useless lawyers.
Get rid of a lot of journalists, then probably they would get challenged at duels all the time.
Yes, they would.
Yes.
But I mean, I always remember the good joke about, the bad joke about American lawyers. Dare I repeat it here?
A lawyer joke, yes, no?
You guys meet in the bar, and one of them said this morning, terrible, driving to work, and I actually knocked over a lawyer crossing the road. And his friend said, what the hell did you do? I reversed over him to make sure he was dead. Some lawyers, when they let criminals out of jail by some silly default of justice, you didn't sign the form or something, right? Let the mass rapist or the serial killer out of jail. Yeah, I mean, Dirty Harry had something to say about that, didn't he?
No, Hitler had something to say about it. He outlawed duels, except unless they were amongst the clergy and lawyers.
That's brilliant. So he wasn't all bad. I didn't just say that, did I? Oh, God.
Well, I mean, it's lawyers and dentists. They have hard jobs. dentist I really need. I know. So
Oh, I desperately need dentists. I was a sugar baby.
Well, you're British,
I
so
was,
yes.
no, I was born, my mother told me, the very month that the government lifted the rationing on sugar. The very month. And so I was doomed. My teeth were doomed. My mother bought so much sugar, so I gave me so many chocolates. I was a paradise for dentists. They went away on, they went on holiday to the Bahamas after I visited them. They earned so much money.
Well, I mean, British and dentistry, we can always talk about that. There's no shortage of jokes on that one. But I agree. It really is being here in a place with so much history. I do love going to the beach, and I can, in the middle of December, I can jump on my Harley and in my shorts and work out in the sun. But an autumn forest in Europe with the leaves turning brown, and then everywhere I go, there's just a battlefield and a fort and shell craters.
And when we did the U-turn on the 4-lane road, and we climbed and eventually found the Fort of Le Regret.
The illegal U-turn that somebody adjacent to us may have made. I don't remember.
That one, yeah, I saw the guy doing it.
Yes, couldn't have been me.
And when we drove down into the ditch, which is the biggest ditch I've ever seen, and one of the biggest forts I've ever seen, and staring at us was the biggest three-story reinforced concrete barrack block that took the whole, it filled the horizon.
We had no idea it was there. He said, "Oh, there's a fort on top of this hill somewhere I heard about. Do you want to go see? We're driving by here." And
bear with me a second.
Hey, gotta get the cat out. It was the most amazing thing. He's like, "Look, have a look at this," and we're just like, "I want to see some forts." And we finally get to this place, and there's some ammunition storage on the way, and it's late, and I didn't figure, this was enormous. The most,
the Caponia guarding the entrance was the biggest I've ever seen in reinforced concrete. 3 stories of firing embrasions facing you, and you think,
just for a
I'm dead.
Caponia, this is amazing.
And in the ditch, this enormous ditch, so when they put armored turrets in the fort, they had to build bridges across the ditch to drag the turrets from the land into the fort.
It had never been shelled, so it was still intact, pretty much. And the it hadn't been shelled, had it?
No, it had never been shelled.
It had never been shelled, and the military have kept it, and they still own it. But there's a group of volunteers that spend every day and night, like we always say, history is protected by an army of volunteers. And here was, so we're walking into this fort, and there's this big, bold, angry-looking Frenchman with this dark dog standing on the roof of the fort.
3 stories of
military clothing and short sleeves with a weed whacker or a chainsaw or something. Yeah. And it's like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Coming down, and the dog is running towards us down the walkway. There's this enormous ramp. You haven't seen this episode yet, but you will, and it's just amazing.
It's fantastic.
And as the dog comes close, I'm like, it's a dog. I'll talk to the dog. It's like, figure it. I have no idea what this thing is. If it was a pit bull or something, it's the biggest, happiest lab in the world.
Yeah.
And the guy, after overcoming initial skepticism of these 2 people with cameras that came in, when he started smiling, and he spent 3 hours showing us around. His wife came, showed us around.
Yes, and he started with the words, "Normally, you're not allowed to see around this." And Tino looked at me and he said, "He's just said normally." And I said, "Yeah." we rushed in.
I don't do normally. None of you have seen this. No one has seen this. No one from YouTube or anywhere has snuck through the hallways of this fort.
One of the biggest forts I've ever seen. Just hidden away, just waiting to be discovered.
I did leave him with a brick of beer for him and all those volunteers.
Yes.
That was at least the least thing
really
I could do.
Move, yeah. And to fly your drone, you had to ask permission on your mobile phone from the French authorities, which you then got. And you flew your drone.
Speaking of drones, actually, I told you guys about that on Friday. I still never figured out what happened at Le Capole.
Oh, scary thought. This is a scary story.
There's now, as we all said, we talked about, we wanted to look at the V1, V2, V3, which is the cannon,
the London gun,
the London gun,
millipede.
And then you
Copied
had
by
the
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Oh, sorry.
Well,
That's
what?
all the information on that has disappeared from history. Of course,
Really?
he didn't have a. Of course, he didn't have a millipede. Of course, there wasn't a third prototype gun that was being aimed at Israel. No, it never existed.
Oh, did that get covered? Okay.
Oh, don't talk about that.
I haven't even gotten to look that up yet, so I didn't know that misinformation disappeared.
Saddam Hussein's the information.
I know he did. Yeah.
Suddenly disappeared.
Oh well, there's a lot of things that disappeared in Iraq that wasn't there, or then they were there, and then they weren't there. I stopped.
Yes.
It's like why. And if you're going to talk about documentation or you want to show pictures of weapons of mass destruction, why don't you send an intern to Kinko's and have a little donkey and draw on a couple of nuclear weapons on the side and send them off? And here's a picture. Photoshop the damn thing. Anyway, let's go. Speaking of another man with a mustache, let's go from Saddam back to Hitler. Or Stalin. Mustache things. So I went out to Calais and I looked at the blockhouse that was sort of technically the first bunker for the V2 rockets that became the official story is the blockhouse was the first launch pad for V2 rockets, and then when they got bombed, then that was untenable and they went to La Coupole. That was much bigger, and that became the place for launching V2 rockets. And it's a very, if you look at all the history books and look at what I've been told, and I didn't expect to find anything strange. Like we know that everywhere I go, sometimes strange things just happen or appear magically from underground. The more I had explained as to what this place was through interpreter, through the person that owned the place, who've had it ever since after the war because it was on his family's property, the less I am buying the official narrative, because it's just, is your phone ringing? Do an interview and his phone is ringing. This is just terrible.
Sorry about that.
Considering we're very far out everywhere and I have no reception myself. So, but I got to tell you what, something doesn't add up to what I saw in Calais. That is just, there's a lot of things missing, and even the interpreter couldn't figure out what the official story actually was. I think we're going to have to go diving, and I think we're going to have to. There's some stuff going on with that blockhouse.
Yeah, but it's all been sealed at the advice of the son of Marie Curie, who said, it's being flooded, the Germans have smashed all the pumps. My advice is to let it flood. When a nuclear scientist says that, you think,
They sent a nuclear scientist to look at the blockhouse after the war, after the Allies had taken it. And DJI Mini was this one. And it works fine every other day. But there's no mustache. No. And especially that little porn stash is coming back. That little 60s porn stash. I see that in the States. It's like, dear Lord. And then they die. It's just terrible.
I shaved mine off as well. It kept getting stuck in it. So
I'm living in suitcase, so I have no idea what my razor is. But yeah, they sent a nuclear scientist to look at this thing, and I couldn't even get a clear answer if there's a sub-basement, and everything's flooded, and there's a sub-basement because there's actually doors leading down into it that you can sort of see, you can climb into, but it was raining cats and dogs, literally. So I'm gonna wait. We're going to swimming until it gets summer because I kind of want to go in there because there's something underneath, and it's on top of a hill, which makes it even stranger that it would flood unless it's literally sealed off.
The bombing raids all around smashed up the water table, and that made the basement flood. So the Germans installed high-power pumps, and then as they evacuated the place, they smashed them. So it would fill. That's what they did. Yeah, it was the bombing raids.
It certainly did. It was just this is strange things that surrounds that we want to know, that we need to know,
and especially as they changed the guidebook from the version I saw many years ago, and then suddenly that disappeared, and the whole story changed in a new guidebook, which doesn't explain anything. It asks more questions than it answers.
It's funny, every time you go to museums like this, you that revolve any kind of German technology, you get a very, very superficial history of that's generalized, but nothing really dives into what the specific sites are. But I mean, you used to hear me bitch and moan about things we can't get into. I will say, just for a side note, that a CC Top beard is cool. I'm good with that. Didn't he just die, the lead singer of CC Top? I thought he died a couple of months ago.
Well, I'm too young to know all about things like that. I'm too old, I mean.
Too old.
Not too young.
I think they're probably your age. CC Top.
Oh, that's why they died.
They're probably
all right, okay.
well, these things do happen.
I like ABBA.
JFK's brother, yes, he did. Well, hang on. Do an actual bombing flight.
Yes.
You know more about this.
A radio on the ground in England was supposed to set off the explosive device on his plane.
And that was really strange too. Another Kennedy that dies, and that was really weird. That thing, how that happened as well, because that got covered. That got covered.
Yeah, but the thing is that JFK, his older brother, was being tutored by their father to become president, and JFK was already a war hero. So his brother had completed his tour of duty on anti-submarine work for the US Navy. And instead of going back home to the USA to train new pilots or to rest, he volunteered for this virtual suicide mission. The plane loaded with explosives that they were going to jump out and let a chase plane take over. And
it wasn't a training flight, was it? It wasn't a training flight.
It was an actual mission flight against the V3 site at Mimoyek. And as they passed over the English countryside, they think a radio signal from the ground made the bombs explode. They're never certain. There's no proof of it. But they just vaporized, poor guys.
Yeah.
And so then JFK came in to take over from his brother, to replace him as future presidential candidate. Already a war hero. Very sad story.
I gotta go. We're sitting quite a far away from the screen, so I gotta crawl in here to actually read it.
Is that
that's why I'm getting closer to it, because I gotta. Okay. Otherwise, we won't both be in the. Hang on, I'm gonna see what. Now I gotta read the questions here.
The tall boys. What happened was that a tall boy exploded underground and broke an underground river that the Germans didn't know was there. And the underground works, where the slave workers and the SS guards had taken cover during the bombing raid, started to fill with water at an alarming rate. And I met the last slave worker to make it alive out of the underground workings. As he climbed the ladder at full speed to escape from the surging water, he looked round at his friend who was swept away and drowned. He's the last guy out.
And that's also a problem, because you're not being told anything about this underground now, that when you're there now. It's being ignored that there was this underground. Some years after the war, they put this huge slab on. They elevated the floor, as you know.
Yeah, they closed all the lift shafts. They sealed off the underground works. It never existed, obviously. But there's a railway engine model which I have, which it's a condenser, a big wartime condenser loco, built for the steppes of Russia, so that she could run hundreds of kilometers without having to stop for water in the middle of the steppes, where she might be ambushed by partisans. That's the plan. She would take German munitions out, German munitions out, and bring back wounded soldiers to Germany. And one of these was found derailed in northern France in June 1944, July 1944, July. And nobody knew what the hell she was doing there. The moment I went to Mimoyek and I stood at the entrance to the underground railway station, I immediately knew what she was doing there. Because there's this huge long tunnel with a platform on one side where they would unload the thousands and thousands of fin projectiles, the spring fin projectiles that they were going to fire at London. Yes. Out of the 25 gun barrels. They would need thousands to come up with a surprise bombardment before the British could react. They'd destroy half of London in a couple of days. That was their plan. Now, the projectiles, these spring-out fin projectiles, which we've never found because they fired all of them. And all we found was the training dummies with without fins that don't work. The Americans tried firing those out of sections of the V3 gun, and they just spun through the air and didn't think, oh, this thing doesn't work. Of course, it works if you use spring-loaded tails on the
So they officially never found any from...
They never found any because they were all got fired at Luxembourg in 1945. Now, let's get back to the story. The moment I saw that railway tunnel, I knew exactly where that condenser locomotive was found off the rails in northern France. They had done a trial run from the factory in Czechoslovakia, or the Slovak Republic, they called it, under German occupation, to see if they could get her overnight from the factory in the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, to Mimoyek without having to stop for water. That's the only reason she's there. She does a long distance non-stop run. And on the way back, she came off the rails because she's so long with the condenser tender and everything like that.
Did this have anything to do with transport of specific munitions from Skoda back?
Well, yes, because you see, if the factory loads the actual train after the trial run with, say, 10,000 projectiles, and she stops for water, the train stops for water overnight, then French partisans might slip a time bomb in one of the cars, in one of the cases, holding the projectiles. They load that into the underground fortress, into the,
Oh, God, yes.
And they go off and blow the whole thing sky high. So the Germans weren't going to take the risk of that happening. They were running a condenser locomotive, it should have been in Russia, from Czechoslovakia into Mimoyek.
And they were looking at the Richeling shell. They were working on. Or was that the the Richeling shell was the predecessor to the big V3 gun in Mimoyek, wasn't it?
The Richeling shell was the anti-concrete shell.
Yeah, the bunker busting.
Yeah, well, the projectiles that were going to be fired on London didn't have to penetrate armor or concrete or anything like that. They were 9 foot long from memory. A long time since I saw it. I've seen one of the training examples.
Yeah,
it's at the British Artillery Centre in England, and they have a sabot on, not far from the dummy nose.
Yeah,
there's a non-explosive dummy nose. Then the sabot, which will fill up the the smooth bore.
Like it's a non-calibrated to the cannon.
Yeah, it's smaller than the cannon, and at the rear is another small sabot from memory, but no fins. If you fire this thing, it'll
go nowhere. Yeah,
over
no, it has to be finished because it wouldn't be spun. It wouldn't be spun.
It wouldn't be spun.
No.
It has to go up at a terrific speed, something like from again. A long time since I planned to write a book on this. It's something like 2,700 feet a minute. They had to emerge.
Yeah, and these shell, the power of these shell was the kinetic energy at impact.
Yeah,
more so than they exploded because they weren't that big.
They would hit a building,
it was how the speed
through an office block and blow up.
Yeah,
yeah, or hit a double-decker bus in the middle of the street and render it.
None of those were ever found.
None were ever found. We only
tested them for years.
Dummies. They did work. We know they worked because they fired them at Luxembourg.
Yeah,
and when the Luxembourgers found the remains of one that I think had hit the cathedral, one of the towers of the cathedral, they examined it and they saw it was a tube with fins on the end, and they said, they're firing rockets at us. Yeah. Now, I've searched for years to find out if there's one of those remnants of shells survives somewhere. It's somewhere in a bunker, in a depot, in a cupboard.
Now we're looking at a World War II technology that would destroy something at a very long ways away.
Yep, 73 miles to Luxembourg, but it's a lot further to London.
It was into the stratosphere.
It would go quite high.
It would go quite high.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that is, well, we know Saddam Hussein was building one. So now we're looking at World War II technology that has transported into the Gulf War time. Yeah. Which was a good reason why they keep these shells classified, because they were still a viable military technology.
You talk about Babylon, Baby Babylon, and was there a third one?
And you're talking this is like rods of God. The steel, yeah.
Well, the idea was that a shell would hit the center of London. Andrew. Every 6 seconds.
Not really. I stick to cigars.
Every 6 seconds. Can you imagine? I was going to write a book, or I'll give away a bit of the secret. This guy sets off to work on the train in the morning, and he's on the double-decker bus heading for his office, and suddenly At the office block in front of him, the top story explodes. The bus gets to a halt. Everybody jumps off it. 6 seconds later, something hits the bus, and the bus is shredded into a massive scrap. 6 seconds later, the bank down the road explodes. 6 seconds later, a little grocery shop blows up. 6 seconds later, the entrance to an underground station explodes. This goes on all day, and they don't know where it's coming from, and they don't know why, what's happening. By the time they've worked it out and sent in a suicide squad of paratroops to swarm this place, half of London is in ruins.
And that's what the V3 would have been.
That's the V3.
Yeah.
And it was so close. It was the pieces of the tubes, the 25 gun barrels, were numbered, pre-numbered, to be bolted together. And it was bombed by 617 Squadron, the Dambuster Squadron, with their earthquake bombs. A week before, they bolted them together and test-fired them at London.
And they had test-fired the smaller version in the
They
year
fired
before.
them towards the Balkans, the Baltic Islands, and they got a version that worked, finally.
Yeah.
With the multi-barrels. Every time Ian Hogg said it was electronically timed. There's no way you could do that even today accurately with a gun barrel of a couple of 100 feet, 250 feet long. No, the shells were put in. I've got one of the shell cases that they used. It's a howitzer case. They just put them into simple breeches all the way up the length of the gun barrel, with open-ended. Just the powder in a bag, a silk bag in the cartridge case. And as the flame of the initial cartridge shoved the missile up the tube, the flame would set off each succeeding explosive charge.
So they didn't have to time it.
No.
There didn't have to be any of that. It would just accelerate itself.
Exactly. And we were getting faster and faster and faster and faster the higher it went. And the more bags exploded, the more powder burned. It was an incredibly complex to build and took a long time to load. That's why there were 25 of them. There'd be a whole army of gunners swarming over these things like ants, putting multiple charges up the side of each side.
It's a very impressive sight. And what is really impressive of the V3 gun sight that we're talking about is when you were on. Now, first of all, when the war ended.
Politics came into play.
Politics came into place because, France and England, we fight wars every now and again and always. And Lord knows de Gaulle was not an easy person to deal with.
And here the French have a weapon designed to destroy London.
Churchill didn't want that.
No, nobody wanted that except de Gaulle, probably.
But de Gaulle, because de Gaulle wanted to keep this thing intact, and Churchill had it specifically ordered to be blown up quite well.
By aircraft bombs, tons of aircraft bombs.
Actually, engineers as well.
The engineers
inside the tunnels.
They wheeled unexploded aircraft bombs inside it by the ton.
And when you see the muscles, for lack of better, I guess it is still a muscle, isn't it? Projectile leaves it, so it'll be a muscle, isn't it? It's not really a gun barrel at the.
No, there were sliding steel armored shutters over the top of the gun muzzle, where they emerged from the concrete.
And those. The interesting is, I was there. There was all these red signs that said something about military area, skulls, deaths. I don't know. I don't read French signs. I'm sorry. My French is terrible. I know. There was some barbed wire and stuff, but I'm sure it said something that means something to someone.
Don't fall in the big holes because there's nobody around to get you out.
Or it's a military area. Tino, keep the hell out. But anyway, I went in there. When you see these ruins, you see the cement blocks of how well this was protected. Yeah. These are thicker than Hitler's bunkers than anything I've ever seen. And you still see in one block that was blown up to the side, you see the 5 muscles.
The gun muzzle.
And they're not big. They're not the big 420 World War I howitzers. They're not that big.
The shell's about that diameter, and the sabot took it out to about a little bit more.
It's a very, very small and extremely potent weapon. If this had worked.
Now, the reason they had so many training shells was that they were going to have to train, as I say, a whole army of loaders.
Yes.
So these were handling dummies. That's all we found. And then the Americans tried to fire them. It's like trying to find a wooden 5-inch 38, practice projectile out of a Fletcher class destroyer's gun. It would just go wee and fall in the sea.
I mean, it would be interesting to see. Now, one of the things I did do up in Belgium, where they tested a smaller version of these, the Richeling shell, which was a test version of the bunker buster. You saw the little trailer I did. You maybe have done for Fort Aubin, and the damage done 30 meters below through reinforced concrete into the galleries, completely. I mean, destroyed. Yeah. And the testing they did is just it's amazing, the damage. And you see those, they're about this big, and what are they, like 5 feet long, 6 feet long, and they're just a steel tube, and they would penetrate all of this, and so something twice that big, a lot faster, would really have done some damage to London. No wonder Saddam wanted one.
Yeah. So aim it at Tel Aviv, you could destroy the place in a couple of hours.
At least
not the size of London, is it?
No.
And the gun barrel, the tubes were ever so slightly angled, so they centered the main gun barrel cluster of 5 centered on Tower Bridge, and the other 4 clusters was splayed out slightly to the left and slightly to the right, so they covered the whole area of central London.
Yeah. Something about fleets. What did I miss here? What would you like to know? I would like this challenge. Oh, thank you. But so, if you have any World War I questions, this will be a good time. By the way, I'm just saying. Yes, the MimiX. That's the visa. Yeah, that's pretty much what we've just been talking about. I just came from there, and we've been talking about how some of these things are. It was really an interesting. Now, don't make it wrong. The guys at the Blockhouse are awesome people. They're really, really nice. They're super friendly, and the owner has the Frenchest mustache I've ever seen. It is he look up a picture look up Frenchman. It'll be a picture of him and his mustache. But I know we were through the translation, and there's just, when you can't explain to me why something, I'm not sure he knows what really happened at his site. And when you see all the graphics of how these rockets are going to be wheeled out the side of this bunker,
and the wall is solid.
The wall is solid. I'm staring at it, straining to try to figure out where the holes are.
The thing I thought when I went there, he said, "Now we wheel them out the side to fire them." It's, well, you can't. It's a big solid concrete wall,
and you can see if you have a hole in the bunker, and it's filled in. You can see.
Yeah.
These were all in layers. And I keep thinking, so they built the whole thing and they were going to cut them out, or what were they doing there?
And with no armor doors, so the rocket blast would come straight back.
Well, no armor doors.
All the other rockets to the way.
And the ventilation in the roof, nothing makes sense.
And then there's a tiny little, looks like a blockhouse outside, and they say, that's the firing point. Well, if you're in that firing point about 15 feet from a V2 rocket base, the base of the rocket about to take off, you're going to be toast. Literally,
you'll have a bad day.
So a very short day. Now the thing is that's in the original guidebook. That's the concreted over, protected head of a spiral staircase leading down into the very, very deep basement, which of course doesn't exist.
No,
not there. Don't talk about the basement.
Don't talk about the basement.
And the spiral staircase is now turned into a firing point.
Now he would let me go dive there next year. Which is couldn't really do that.
Do you have a lead-lined diving suit?
I'm not expecting to have kids because I'm not.
There we are.
I don't have a girlfriend, so no kids. So who need those things?
Right.
Or I'll try to get it done. I'll figure it out before. I do need weights. I do need
Lead
good
weights.
10
put a few
pounds.
lead weights around you for your vital parts. Yes.
I'll get a lead cod piece, and then
lead cod piece. Yes, you
then
would need one to get down in that place.
and then I'll go diving in radioactive water. But he would let me. He said, if you want to go dive, go dive. Bring a partner. You should be too.
Yeah.
Like, and there's enormous amount of tunnels underneath that bunker that you can see. You get a little boat there. You can sail through it. But I need to go see what's deeper because maybe GPR in the floor of the where the spiral staircase is, where it's a cemented flat floor. Maybe a GPR would be able to see what's below that.
Right. Yes.
But that might just turn into be a more interesting site than we thought. And since it's on private property, he's more amenable to letting us do.
But you were going to tell the mystery story of the dome, and you didn't.
The mystery story of the dome. Which one of them was
when
it?
you went to fly?
Oh, the dome. Because I told them on Friday.
Oh,
from my microscopic hotel room. They know.
All right. So
yeah.
I only learned about it's like the joke about the little French boy who goes to school. Sorry about this. He goes to school for the first time, and his father is so pleased. The little boy comes home happy. The weekend, the whole week passed as well. And at the weekend, he takes his little boy to Calais to see the ferries. And they've got the gangway, the cars go off one end, the trucks, and they've got the gangway for the foot passengers. And the first Englishman who sets foot on France, the little boy runs towards him, pushes him in the water, splash. The second Englishman comes down the gangplank, and the little boy runs towards him and upends him into the water, splash. And the father grabs him just before he throws the third Englishman in the water. He says, "What the hell are you doing?" And he says, "But they built Joan of Arc." And the father says, "But that was hundreds of years ago." And the little boy says, "Yes, but I only heard about it yesterday." That's me in the story of the drone, my excuse.
I mean, not everybody with them. I actually thought that one of the big pre-World War I forts they built in Metz is called Joan of Arc.
Yes.
But that was the French had named it Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
I thought that was the Germans had named it Joan of Arc just to
annoy the French. That would be. But the name changing of forts is very interesting because the Le Fort de Guentrange at Thionville was built as the Festung Obergetranger by the Germans, and inside, when you go to guided tour, and hanging from various parts of the tunnels are these enamel signs which says this way in French, this way to the to the casement, this way to the generator room, this way to the gun turrets, etc. in French, and when you turn them round, there's another side to them also enamel written in German. Because every 10 or 20 years or so, they change signs. They just turn the signs around.
And if you wonder why it's fun to crawl around under these forts, I found one of the World War I forts where apparently the Germans during World War II made war provisions, weapons, torpedoes. So you never know what you find in these old fortresses. That's what I didn't tell you guys.
What you found in the forest. Oh, all right. Go on.
Which one of that?
This morning.
Oh, what did I find?
Something built by a crown prince.
Well, you got to show them that.
Oh, you're going to show them, all right. Forget I said that.
We'll get back to not Wilhelm, Ruprecht.
Ruprecht, yeah.
Somebody built a little castle bunker. I mean, if you're going to go
home from home,
if you're going to be, fireplace, very ornate.
And a strange object in the middle of the room. We have no idea what it is yet.
Oh yes, there'll be pictures of a thing, and if anybody is specifically knowledgeable on Bavarian
castles and history and
one of the Bavarian
home cooking or something.
Home cooking, religion maybe. There's the Crown Prince's World War I bunker. He built it very ornately, very highly decorated, and there's an interesting little structure in the middle that looks like it was like a second. It wasn't the second thought because it didn't really fit. It looked like it was brought in there, which is kind of curious what it is. If it's a fireplace, a little oven, or a shrine, or was World War I. So, what I was going to say is I
Bavarian
found it.
Illuminati.
Bavarian Illuminati. Might
There
have been
was a
saying.
beer here.
Where was the Illuminati? They were in Austria, Swiss. They were in Swiss originally in the 1800s for 10 years officially. I don't know what they're doing now, and I don't care much. However, you all remember that enormous fortress Plappeville that I went to that I adore so very, very much. That's up here outside Metz. That huge infantry fort that was built before the 19th century, like 1886, I think, and it fought World War One. It was manned by the Germans, and it fought World War Two. And it's enormous. Still, the guns in there. I found my little bat friend and stuff. Well, guess what? The French military is selling it. Yes. So what we need now is from all of you to call your rich uncles. We only need 400,000 euros. And We're on.
Ah,
Are we still on?
hide the cake.
Now we can eat cake. Can you hear us? We are in the middle of. I'm sorry, I know you live here, but we are in the middle of nowhere.
I came here for the peace of the countryside to write my books and do my translations. Sometimes the piece is a bit overwhelming, like
They're
everything
back.
cuts off.
We're back.
Yes, excellent.
We just brought cake and everything. We'd given up on you. You left us all. We had a reception issue. We had a reception connectivity issue. We have a whole lot of storms and weird things that flying around here, and we are somewhat adjacent from what you would consider the technologically civilized world.
Yes, I have to walk outside for my mobile phone to have one bar.
Wearing a foil hat.
Yes, and if the cow bends down to chew the grass, then the one bar disappears.
So please buy more of his books so he can get proper internet. It does help. What I was saying is, now that I'm sitting here with a fork, I figured this was it. I can eat my flan.
It's not to threaten me; it's to eat a huge flan.
I'm in France. I should eat flan. Damn it! 400,000 euros to buy Plappeville, which is amazing. We'll need a couple of million to turn it into a historical museum/hotel headquarters for lost battlefields.
Yes.
But I think somewhere somebody has a couple of million to buy this enormous forts. And I want Festung der Damen as well, just because it's really cool. I don't know why. I just.
Well, why not make a hotel in the Fort de Regret? There's enough rooms.
That's still owned by the military, and I don't think they want to sell it.
Well, they're not using it for storage anymore.
Oh, by the way, next year you're all coming out to help us clean brush and wood and trees and grass from Festung der Regret. I'm just there's a lot of crap. Today, a couple of days ago, we were really trying to get through the brush out at Wandergolz to look for that huge hole where the torpedoes had exploded with the truck, and it is so dense. Of course, a specific map would have helped. But anyway, and it's full of thorny, crappy thingies. I was at the Hitler's Last Revenge is planting thorny bushes and poison ivy everywhere around where I want to go look at history. I'm pretty sure that
he left it in his will, you know. If I ever go or disappear, then you guys go out and make them pay.
The ultimate revenge weapon of the Nazis are mosquitoes and poison ivy. At least that's what I'm. That's my thought. And I don't know if you guys all remember, but Lost Battlefields is officially turning into a non-profit to raise funds to document all these sites, also with virtual reality walkthroughs. But a lot more on that. What? Agent Orange. Yes. DDT is your friend.
Agent Orange.
I'm all in favor. I've been like flamethrowers.
Yeah.
Oh, dude! Funny story. They wouldn't open the flak tower, one of the flak towers in Vienna that never been bombed, never any damage to it. They wouldn't open it as a museum because they couldn't have handicap access, bathrooms, and fires proof it. It is all stone, cement. That burns all the time.
That is the fireproofing, you know, against incendiary bombs. Isn't it? It's
like,
designed to.
Could we just stop the nonsense? Damn you! All right. What people? Where? Please send a link to your non-profit. Let me get back to Lost Battle. Let me get back to the States. This is something that just happened within the last week. So I need to get stuff done. I can do. Yeah, this is a stupid reason.
Yes, I was already. Yes.
Speaking of something else that you might all want to know, we talk about the Jonastal tunnels were covered in this black soot that you all asked about. We tried to figure out why that was, and I found out why because I went to the Messerschmitt tunnels where they built the Me-262s, right on the other side, and that was one thing that happened. And another tunnel in Austria, when the Russians blew them up, they blew them up with phosphorus, so they literally burned for weeks. And that's where all the black came. They didn't just blow them up; they blew them up with fires, phosphorus. So that's why there was all that black soot on some of the walls and some of these tunnels that the Russians blew up, which is a little bit like, why on earth can you like overdo things? Redstone, DDT, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, okay.
Oh, I love that. I love bitumen. That's gorgeous. What a great misspelling.
Tomorrow, where are we going tomorrow?
We are going to the Batterie de l'Éperon to see the giant gun turret, twin 155L. And
last one in the world, only one in the world.
The only one left.
Only one in the world.
Yes.
That's right.
And the twin Mougin casemates, which is a fantastic place. And then we're going to round it off by a visit to the citadel of Montmédy, where Vauban learned his trade. He had to break into the place, and then he had to modify it to make it more difficult for someone else to break in.
Want to tell them who Vauban was?
Vauban, the great French engineer, who built bastions all around the place.
So he was the great French fortress builder of World War One, just like Briand.
Before Louis XIV.
Louis XIV.
Yeah.
Well, he was his fortress builder.
Yeah.
So he was the French pre-Briand.
17th, 18th century work came out.
And a lot of these looks like they're straight out of the 17th, 18th century.
Yeah.
Some of these
we looked at today, it's Roman.
The masonry is amazing.
Yeah. Beautiful work.
There was something else I was saying. What was I saying? I had it. Oh, speaking of poisonous gas, not that we were, but well, we talked about DDT, so now we are talking about pure poisonous gas. Funny story, except if you're a fish or a dolphin or a seal or anybody else who lives off the coast of California, all the poisonous gas that was stored with the military out there and the manufacturers of some of the toxic weapons in World War I and World War II, they were stored out in Southern California, and when they couldn't figure out what to do with them, they sailed them out in drums on barges off the coast and rolled them into the ocean,
like they did in the Baltic, just 100 yards off the beach.
Yes, and now they're sort of kind of leaking and things. But I mean, they did it to save money, which is a good reason to dump poison gas in the ocean.
Yeah. But they did something similar here near Verdon. We're still suffering from the results of World War I over 100 years later, because I heard a French officer, a colonel, there was colonels, on French television say, when the Germans surrendered on the 11th of November 1918, and I jumped in my chair because they didn't surrender, they all marched back to Germany with their rifles on their shoulders, carrying their machine guns, dragging their cannons behind them. What they didn't take with them was the poison gas shells. So to the east of Verdun, there are 3 farms where the Germans left behind thousands of poison gas shells. Green Cross and all the rest of them. The French army came along, were horrified, and they announced, we dismantled them all. Well, they didn't dismantle any of them. They buried the darn things. And 100 years later, the metal casings meant to smash and let out the poison gas are now so thin, they rusted through, and the gas seeps out, poisons the ground, poisons the grass, poisons the cows, poisons the chickens, poisons the pigs. 3 farms have had to be closed forever, really, by the look of it, by the French government, which has bought the land. Farmers had to move away. We're still suffering from the results of World War I here.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Now, speaking of World War I, Sean had an interesting question. That apparently I can't. Thank you. Best World War I battlefield.
That depends what you want, really, doesn't it, Tino? If you want to, you go to the Somme and you see massive graveyards. Okay, fine.
Verdun is special.
Yeah, Verdun is
right here is special. There's a reason why I guess I keep coming back here. It really is. You have so many forts, so many battlefields, so many interesting little ruins. That's why I had to start doing a specific World War I Verdun series off here because, well, that's your fault.
Oh, yeah.
I
Led
mean,
him everywhere.
but-
Down, he fell down holes. He slid down into tunnels. And
Well,
I guess couldn't stop him. It was just,
you kind of lost me today when I decided, like, if it wasn't for you outside going, like, where the hell are you? We have an appointment. And I'm crawling further into a tunnel.
further and further.
And honestly, much as I love you, and I want you to think that I came out of that tunnel because I knew you were waiting, that is not entirely true. The camera was running out of battery.
Oh, no.
I was like, damn it, I don't have enough
Yeah,
battery.
you were using it, the flashlight as well.
Yeah.
The big torch. Yeah.
I was like, I gotta go,
And we did make it just on time.
We did.
After some really excellent
Just
high-speed driving.
9 minutes to spare.
Yes.
Verdon, Sean, is really a place to visit. I will say,
because it's the German things hidden away in the forest as well. The most amazing things.
There's a little bit of everything. It's an interesting area. Yes, and Metz also because it's so close to Metz and everything else. 5,000.
Lots of lives.
Get to highlight these as I can. Oh, the bats. We're talking about the bats again. Yes. No, they don't. The Austrians were, the Austrians' theory of World War II is we were not there. We all went on vacation in 1938, and when we came back in 45, the Germans had built all these things everywhere. They all did it. We were invaded,
and they had brought in German children to wave flags, especially.
Yes.
No Austrians waved a sword.
All of those millions of people that waved the little flags.
Please. When their empire was torn to pieces and destroyed by the Allies after World War I, you'd think they would be mightily pissed by that, and they were. They had a fantastic empire, which was at the pinnacle of so many things: technology, art, music, literature, architecture. They had so much going for them, and to get revenge on them because World War I started in Sarajevo, we destroyed their empire. We literally pulled it to pieces.
40% of Austria was taken
We got
away.
70 years of squabbling, arguments, and fighting, and ethnic cleansing because of what we did there.
Yeah, Treaty of Versailles. Thank you so much. Well, that actually wasn't Treaty of Versailles.
Before,
and the treaty with Austria after the Treaty of Versailles was directly copied off the Treaty of Versailles. It was verbatim. Some of it was covered onto the Austrian, where it says the Austrians were not allowed to have submarines. For instance, they were landlocked.
Well, yeah, that's the Von Trapp family, isn't it? Captain Von Trapp that sank the French battleship. Naughty man.
That's one of those questions when you ask why do people do incredibly stupid things like.
Yeah, they do them for various reasons. There was a British officer who, a few minutes before 11 a.m., he wanted to win a medal. He led his men on an attack on a German-held bridge against machine gun nests, and they were all killed. Everybody killed. For nothing. Minutes before the armistice. To the north of Verdun is the town of Stenay, where they have the fantastic European Museum of Beer, which I thoroughly recommend. It's fantastic. You go around all the beer museum, it's all the wonderful things, and at the end you end up in the bar and you have a row of beers to try out. Oh, it's a lovely place. Now, not good if you're the driver, but if you're a passenger, you're okay. Now, to the north of Stenay, the river narrows slightly, it's quite wide, the Meuse, and an American general wanted promotion or whatever, or notoriety, so he got that. He sent his men to chop down trees and build wooden rafts to paddle their way across the river in the face of German machine gun fire. And they lost hundreds of guys. That was about an hour before the armistice. All for nothing. Absolutely nothing. The Germans were not going to give in. They were going to resist being attacked up to the last moment.
Yes.
They weren't going to let people run over them and grab everything and beat them up and make them prisoners of war. They were going to fight to stay free.
And then they were going to walk home.
And then they were going to walk home. And they thought if anybody's going to attack us, they're going to stop us going home. In a prisoner of war camp.
Yeah. And it's why isn't it a hard question? Millions and millions of people were killed for
9 million soldiers died, 9.5 million.
And only God knows how many civilians.
Yeah,
And we can then talk about the aftermath, and then
for the disaster. I mean, Franz Ferdinand, the poor guy who was assassinated at Sarajevo, he wanted to turn the Austrian Empire. He waited so many years for his uncle to die, and he could take over and finally sort things out.
And he specifically didn't want war.
He didn't want war. He was a pacifist. And he said, we've got a way to sort out the problems in the east of Europe. I want to turn it into like the United States of the east of Europe. Yeah. Every little country like Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Slovenia, they can have their own costumes. They can have their own songs. They can keep up their own language if they want. They can be semi-independent, like Arizona and Texas have their own laws and their own flag, their own national guard. But everything would be under the overall control, like the foreign affairs, the defense and everything, and the basic economy of the country, under the control of the Austro-Hungarians themselves. And everything would have been hunky-dory. It could have worked. We'll never know if it could have worked.
It was better than what it was a step in the right direction.
Because somebody said, we don't want this guy screwing everything up, and they killed him. And his little wife threw herself across him to save him, and she died as well. If only I could find a woman like that who was dedicated to save me. Come on. What can you say?
And not only that, the guy that killed him was Gabriel Princip was barely 18. And the interesting thing is when you had the first Tsar Alexander I, he was killed. He wanted to abolish serfdom, and he was killed by a revolutionary. This is good. This could be a very, very, very long conversation we could have about why people do the incredibly stupid things they do. But basically, I think World War I was. I want to quote Blackadder, our great poet of our time. World War I was a war that everybody had prepared for. Everybody knew was coming, and it was just too much trouble to not have a war.
Yeah, he was explaining to Baldric, wasn't he?
Yeah, and it really seemed that way. It was one of those things. It just had to happen.
Well, you see, the French wanted revenge to get back Alsace and the Moselle, not Lorraine. It was only a tiny part of Lorraine.
Yeah,
everybody makes the same mistake, and I did originally. I know better now. Bismarck had taken Alsace and Moselle from France at the surrender negotiations at Sedan, when the emperor became a prisoner of war. And Wimfert said, right, you've won, we shake hands, we all go home. Bismarck slammed his fist on the table, and it's the Times correspondent who told us all about this. Bismarck said, you think you're getting away so easily? In the last 300 years, the French have attacked German nations, because it wasn't Germany as well, the German countries, in 300 years, you have attacked us 70 times. And we're not letting you get away with that anymore. We're going to punish you. Yeah. And everybody said, don't do it. Don't do it. Whatever you do. Yes, he did it. He took Alsace and Moselle from France. And from that moment, the French, they did everything they could to get their lost provinces back. Yeah. The Lebel is the gun of the revenge. Every school child, every male school child in France was given a wooden rifle at about the age of 8 or 9 to parade in the playground with a rifle. When they were about 12, they were given a miniature version of the military Lebel, the Lebel Scolaire, to fire a real bullet in the school playground.
That sounded like the Hitler Youth.
Yeah.
And it was, because the French before World War I were really...
like the Hitler Youth. And then, as the war was about to break out...
No comparisons offended attended.
No. As war was about to break out, the word went out to the schools to take all the little innocent children's songs and change them into patriotic songs. So instead of saying, this is a silly example, on the bridge at Avignon, we all dance. It was, at the approach to Avignon, we kill all the Germans. Everything was aimed at hating Germans. Yeah. Even little school children were taught to sing songs about killing Germans. And the Germans saw this happening and thought, this is going off the rails. Yeah. We're going to do something.
And honestly, the dumbest thing, Napoleon III could have done was start that war with Prussia, because he was doing really well before that.
Yeah.
And then when we got to World War One, it was like everybody was building up for it. Everybody knew it was coming.
Yeah.
And I will say the British could possibly have played a slightly different part in it.
Yes, but the Kaiser was building up a strong navy to go and get more colonies, which meant stealing them from the British and the French.
Yes, because the German colonies were so plentiful compared to the British.
Well, one of his financial advisors said, Your Majesty, don't get any more colonies, please. This is just before World War I. Because I've done my calculations. I've worked out that the ones we have already will take 50 years at least before they can become self-sufficient. Please don't go out and get any more. It's just not what we want at the moment. He said, no, I want colonies.
Small sausage factory in Tanganyika.
Yeah.
That question's for you.
Oh, also the SSG-08, another precision rifles also. They're good at. And the one I can't understand is the monoblock model. That is what?
Okay, we need more clarification, because I haven't heard about the monoblock. Unless there's a monoblock. As we're talking about the SSG-08. Is that the
SSG-08?
Is that the? There's not the
modern
pin
one?
gun, is it?
What?
That's not a needle gun. Not the needle gun we're talking about, is it? We need a little bit more information on that one.
Let's go this. Why do people ridicule French weapons? The Americans laugh about the MAS 36. American armorer, one day he said, never load the ammunition for the MAS 36 standard French rifle to American standards, because the rifle will blow up in your face. It's a brilliant thing. You'd fire an anti-tank round out of it and it'll survive. Was the Shoshat bad or good? The Shoshat was brilliant. If you tightened up all the screws, it would jam on you. If you fired thousands of rounds out of it, the barrel would overheat and jam in the surrounding tube. But the Shoshat, if you read the book Honor Bound by a French descendant of a Shoshat gunner, he says there were guys that walked towards German machine gun nests, firing their Shoshat from the hip as they marched towards the AMG-08 nests. Mm-hmm. And they had a recharger guy beside them who changed the magazines. And as they got empty, that's me stopping the cat stealing one of our cakes. Sorry, no. World War III is breaking out here over cakes. Now,
he couldn't have walked.
You walk firing from the hip. The Americans had the same system with the Shoshat, and they copied it for the BAR. The Americans' belt had a leather pouch where you put the butt of the BAR in, because you were supposed to walk towards the enemy machine gun nest firing as you went. There were guys. Now, if the Shoshat didn't work, how did so many of them, dozens and dozens of them, get the croix de guerre for walking towards German machine gun nests and knocking them out? They sprayed them with bullets. The Germans kept their heads down, and then the VB grenadiers fired their grenades into the machine gun nest and blew them up. There were dozens of guys, Shoshat gunners, who won medals. If the gun doesn't work, you stand up and walk towards the MG-08 machine gun. You die in the first few seconds. Come on. Go back to the real sources and find out what really happened. The Shoshat is a brilliant gun. The legend of the Shoshat being rubbish is the American model. I can't remember how many thousand were ordered by the American government. And what happened with them was they jammed on the first round because they were changed into the 3006 round. Rimless round from the 8mm Lebel heavily rimmed round. Now, the reason they jam on the first round is because the subcontractor didn't bore the chambers out large enough. You bore the chamber out to 3006 size, and you can fire hundreds of rounds out of an American Shoshat, or you can fire it all day. The Poles use Mauser rounds, 792 Mauser rounds in their Shoshats. They fire them all day. Now, the reason that the Americans had Shoshats that didn't work is very puzzling, because there was an American inspector in the Shoshat factories who stamped every gun that went out. That's the 8mm versions that armed the Marines at the battle, the Rock of the Marne. I've got the painting, the Rock of the Marne. The Marines thrown into combat to stop one of the German attacks. They're using show shots in 8mm bell and they're working. Everyone stamped with an inspector stamp at the factory. Yeah. So you're telling me that American show shots went out of the factory after an American inspector had stamped them to say that they fired continuously at full auto. He didn't do it. It was a scam. It was a scam to get around Congress because they wanted to give the French hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they bought crap show shots in 3006 that were put in packing cases and never issued. They were put on scrap heaps and burnt because they knew they didn't work. But they paid the French for them.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
The BAR never made it to France World War
I. The BAR did make it to France.
It did.
Because if you go to the little 1418 museum up the road in Romain where the American War Cemetery is, the guy, the Dutchman who owns it and has opened this fantastic museum where you can touch everything, he has BAR magazines marked 1918, which he found on the battlefield.
So the excellent, because that was always the story that they didn't make it because the Americans didn't want to bring it here.
They were afraid the Germans would copy it. Load of rubbish. They issued them to the troops. And they didn't have show shots in 3006. They were never issued with them. They were scrapped.
And it's not like the Germans actually needed help building a machine gun. It's not like they couldn't figure that out.
Come on, they were building twin-barreled, contra-rotating machine guns.
But that's one of the things we talked about, and I can't even remember why we talked about it at some point in time, about going back to original documents. I think we were talking about the rotating cannon.
The Hotchkiss
where you went through to find actual original documents and why.
Yes, at the testing. Because in the fortresses, to defend the ditches, you had a giant 5-barreled cannon. It looked like a bit like a, what's it called, the American one? The Gatling. It looked like a Gatling on steroids. It's got 5 barrels, 40 millimeters caliber in the fortress version. That's to stop the French Navy pinching them from the forts because they fired 37 millimeter shells. And if you fired one of those down a fortress gun, it just wobbles down the barrel without touching the rifling.
Yes.
So nobody wanted to steal them. They left them in the forts. Great psychological feature.
But you won't know until you actually look it up in the archive and actually find the original documents.
Yeah. So the puzzling thing about the fortress guns meant to cover a ditch about how long? About 200 yards long?
Yes.
Right. Each gun has a different rifling, each barrel. And you think, what the hell are they playing at? What happened was they took the Hotchkiss to the testing grounds and they had a prototype and they put 5 different riflings in the 5-barrel gun with the aim of finding out which was going to be the best. And then suddenly when they tested them, they said, hang on a minute, when we turn the handle twice, we rotate the cannon. The first rifling makes it explode just in front of the gun. The second about 30 yards further on. The third one, another 50 feet. A couple of turns of the barrel, using the 5 differently rifled barrels, you cover the whole ditch. Yeah. They said, okay, we'll keep the prototype and we'll make them like that. Or 5 different rifling pitches. Yeah. It's amazing. But you've got to go back to the original documents to find that out. Otherwise, you haven't got a clue what's going on.
It's not like there's any of them really exist.
The same thing with the show shot. The same thing with the BAR. I mean, you don't have to go back to the archives. You go into the museum and the guys found the things in the trenches.
Yeah. So what about the Thompsons? I don't know. It must have been...
Didn't make it to World War One. I don't think it did.
Was it made by the time of World War One? It was in early 1900s.
I've got all the books on American armaments. I can look up when the Thompson
we'll owe you an answer on that.
It's an answer, of course, to the German submachine gun.
Yeah,
the trench, the trench cleaner.
Basically, Chris, I will owe you an answer on that one.
Because it was sold to law enforcement. And
everybody else,
and gangsters,
and everybody else wanted one.
Yeah, why was the rifle barrel shortened from World War I to World War II? A big problem was My Lebel rifle is very long. If you fit the enormous quadrifoil bayonet to it, it's about 6 foot long. Now that gives you a great advantage if you're using it as a bayonet instead of shooting. Mine fires 900 yards. It's accurate at 900 without the bayonet. With the bayonet, you have to flip the sight over to compensate for the different torsion of the barrel
and the weight.
At 250 meters, you fix your bayonet and you flip the sight over, and the sight automatically corrects when you've got the bayonet on the thing. Now, with the bayonet on the Lebel rifle or the Berthier, which succeeded it, you have a chance to stand off a death's head hussar charging you down with his lance. You've got your own lance in your hand.
Yeah.
A nest of men holding their rifles and bayonets.
And then
the horse will not charge you. The horse won't charge you. The horse wasn't stupid. No. The man might have urged him on. The horse said no. He'd have turned aside.
And World War II, you didn't have the same kind of trench war envisioned. You didn't have.
Well, no, but you see, never forget that the trenches you see in films are widened by Hollywood to take cameras on rails. You can't fight in a trench with a bayonet on your rifle. It's good for scaring prisoners of war into not running away and that sort of thing, or for cooking meals on and things like that. Or the German ones with saw teeth, it's for cutting wood.
Yeah. But when you get to World War II, you're not looking at the same type of war. You're looking at a different battle where you're not expecting the need of bayonet in that sense.
Well, you see, if you remember Band of Brothers, when they do the famous charge on red, go on red, remember?
Yes.
And he throws the grenade and runs like a maniac, the captain, and the grenade fizzles out, and his men wait behind them. Behind him. And as they finally realize, oh shit, and they run forward to support their captain. This young man is trying to fix his bayonet. And one of the non-coms, he says, look, that'll spoil the aim of your rifle. Yeah. Don't do it. It alters the aim. Now, the only rifle where that doesn't work, where that doesn't affect it, is the MAS 36. Because the MAS 36 is a long needle. You reverse it into the socket, it doesn't touch the barrel. So when you pull it out and fix it forwards, it doesn't affect the torsion aspects of the rifling.
I have a bunch of bayonets for that, but I actually don't know why.
Well, the MP-18, that was the submachine gun used by the Germans.
The MP-18,
while the Thompson was invented, basically.
That was actually kind of cool.
Yeah, but let's face it. One of my ambitions is to earn a trench broom. You don't need a submachine gun when you're trench fighting. No. You need the shotgun, the pump action with the bayonet boss. You got the best of both worlds.
Yes, you need a shotgun for that. You're absolutely right.
And the Germans were so horrified that the American troops were jumping into their trenches and firing at them with shotguns that they made an official complaint somewhere in Geneva. I don't know. And
yeah,
but you're turning warfare into horror. This is the country that invented the poison gas, the bombing of cities by zeppelins, the terror bombing, the unrestricted submarine warfare, and the sinking of ships without warning. But you can't use shotguns against us. That's
mustard gas is fine, but not shotgun.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, that was the misnomer, because people thought that shotguns have been deemed illegal for use in war, and it's still issued. There's still shotguns issued today for bits and pieces.
Yeah, to clear a room, you can either like in the film, the AK-47.
I have a few pictures of German soldiers carrying Astras in battle during World War II, and I have an Astra. Which is probably why we keep talking about them.
Is it the Spanish one?
Yes, the Spanish one.
Well, the Spanish built hundreds of thousands of semi-auto pistols for the French in World War I. The French stopped building pistols in 1914. They concentrated on rifles and machine guns.
That's for World War II.
Yeah, but they went to the Spanish to make semi-auto pistols for their cavalrymen, for their artillerymen, for their machine gunners. So already the Spanish were in the business of making,
and far more reliable than the Luger, because the Astra would take dirt much better.
Yeah, I know. And you load a Spanish pistol made in a workshop in Guernica, you can load it to destroy it. And an armourer one day in England, he thought, yeah, I'll be a clever guy. I'll see how much punishment these cheap Spanish pistols, hammered together in a workshop by a guy with a big mallet, how much punishment they can take. He loaded the gun, he overloaded it with powder, nothing happened. Eventually he filled the barrel with bullets, and he loaded a cartridge with a massive surcharge of powder. He hid behind the barrier and pulled the cord. And when he went up, the pistol was still there. It had survived. And he said, damn, these bastard Spanish, they hand make the most fantastic pistols.
So what you're saying is I can comfortably shoot my Astro without worrying about it blowing up.
Ooh, Guernica. I mentioned Guernica. Why did the Luftwaffe bomb Guernica, the Condor Brigade? Do you know why? You're about to find a little secret, find out the answer to a secret. Why did the Germans bomb Guernica? So that Picasso could paint his mural? So that people could say, what a terrible thing the Germans are doing. They've just invented terror bombing of cities. And it's a bit old by that time. Even the British, when they were fighting the Iraqis to steal, the Mesopotamians, Iraq hadn't been yet invented by Churchill on the map, to steal their petroleum, they kept fighting to throw the British out. They didn't want the British to come in and steal their country and all their petrol. Churchill had given the order to the RAF to poison gas bomb the Iraqi villages to kill enough women and children to stop their fighters from fighting the British. But the fighting ended just before they did it. Wasn't that lucky?
Really?
Yes, it wouldn't have been Abyssinia, where Mussolini used the first poison gas bombs.
And there was poison gas used in Spain.
But no, the reason that Guernica was bombed by the Condor Legion, German planes, etc., dressed up as Spanish, it was nothing to do with the terror raid on the civilian population. Because it was in Guernica that the companies, the little workshops, made the machine guns for the French Air Force.
It was the munition plant.
They had made them.
Munition there.
They had made them. They would make a machine gun for $28, which is the price of an American shotgun.
That
and it would fire.
That's bad business.
It would fire 1,200 rounds a minute. And the French Air Force fought every one they could. And they were so cheaply made that the armourers were told, when they're worn a little bit, you just throw them away. They cost $28. You just go to the shed and you get another one. Fit it in the plane.
That's so not. I did not know that.
And so the Luftwaffe knew that they were going to be able to come up against the French Air Force. So they destroyed the workshops and killed the workers who built the machine guns for the French Air Force.
Well, that's a story you definitely haven't heard.
Now remember where you heard it first.
The pistols French use. This is a French pistol question. That must be you.
Where is it? The Frenchies were mostly Ruby models. A Browning copy made by many different companies. No, the Ruby was a Spanish design. The Espanol, as they called them, were copies of Smith & Wesson and Colt revolvers, completely different. They were the revolvers. The Ruby is a semi-auto pistol. The Espanols, as I said, they were clones of Brownings and Smith & Wessons, but in French 8mm military caliber. Same caliber as they made the Ruby.
All right.
And I had a French 1892 revolver in 80mm caliber, which was made in Spain. Only 100 were made. I had number 80. And it looked identical to the French military version, except the internals were different. They didn't swap over.
Chris was asking if that is a 1911 Colt knockoff. I'm guessing.
No, Colt pistols.
The Colt pistol.
Revolvers, sorry. Revolvers, not semi-auto.
Oh, I like my 1911.
Oh, it's beautiful. I want one.
Oh, I guess I should have sold. Shouldn't have sold mine then.
Or a Browning high power is better. You get 15 rounds in a Browning high power. You only get 8 in it.
Oh, I had to sell my Browning.
You sold your Browning. My cousin in the SAS carried one all through World War II.
I had to sell it because long tragic story. I sold my Binding Powers with SS markings. I needed the money. I was young. I was in college. I couldn't keep making money
I
doing
sold
naked
my
photos.
Riley IMA when I was in college. It would have been worth thousands now. The things we have to do.
At Garant? Well, those, they're
Anyway.
up in price right now.
Yeah, unless you can find one sent back from the Philippines or somewhere.
Get the new ones, actually, not bad.
Has anyone ever looked at space? British Germany could have made weapons and aircraft from there.
Did the Spanish send the Blue Legion?
Yeah,
to,
the Azure, the Legion Azure into Russia. And now making weapons for the Germans, that would have changed an awful lot because the Allies would have really come down hard on Spain for doing that.
I mean, Franco had to send some. He wouldn't go to war. He wouldn't let Germany go through to take any of the islands, go through Spain. But he did send some grain and some food stocks up to the Eastern Front, I believe, was one of the deals. And the interesting thing is, one of the main reasons why Franco didn't, in any which way, join the war on the side of Hitler is because of what's his name? Not Galen. What was his name? The intelligence chief, the German army. What's his name?
The Navy, Admiral
Canaris.
Admiral Canaris.
Canaris always worked against the Reich, against Hitler.
Yeah.
He went to Franco and said, "Don't join the war. Hitler wants to meet with you and want you to get in with the war. Don't do it." Canaris always told him not to, and that's why he didn't.
Good guy Canaris came to a sad end, of course, but as we know. But
I mean, on one hand, yes, but on the other hand, he actually did betray his country.
Yeah, but so did the German scientist who sent the Oslo telegram.
The Oslo telegram,
which said, "Watch out." He sent it to the military attaché, the British military attaché in Oslo, before the German invasion of Norway.
Oh, yes.
And he said, "Look out, we are making this and that and that and that and that and that." And people, it was so far-fetched that they were going to build ballistic missiles and etc. that nobody believed it. And one by one, these things came true.
Yeah.
Until finally they had to think, hell, that guy knew he's a traitor a traitor to Nazi Germany. Let's be careful here. A hero to humanity.
Well, that's true. But to his country, being under the charge of the National Socialists, he was.
Yeah, because they voted Hitler in democratically, didn't they?
Absolutely, they did. He got 33% of the vote.
He's the only political leader in history, unless you go back to Roman days. There's another question. I'll answer that in a second.
That's you.
He's the only political leader who kept every single one of his promises.
Yeah.
Everyone.
He did everything.
He said, "I will give you work." He gave them work. All right, it was armaments mostly. I will build, auto routes, communications. If every German worker, he sticks a stamp in a book every month, and we'll give him a free car. And they designed the Volkswagen, the people's car, especially for that. He said, "I will give you holidays." And he built cruise liners to take them to Norway and around the Baltic. And finally, he said, "I will restore German greatness." And he started World War II. All right, he kept his promise when that's the one that went wrong.
He
kept all his promises.
I'll do a quick one because Kamla was not. That's a different Kamla question. Get to that in a minute. You do the
Trouble with the Rim is that many of them were not interchangeable parts for some of the films they made. They're like, still up. Yeah, most of the shows they make now. The problem with rubies is that they were made in small workshops, and each workshop, the one down the road, might make slight differences in measurements. Yeah. So yes, you're probably right, but of course, don't forget that they are like the small caliber pistols carried by German staff officers in World War II. hide the gates, kicks away.
Well, we are sort of in the. Well, we're back. Yes, Roger's not moving the cows. And we did another foil hat.
Yes. Did you get the answer about the ruby? That they were put in little individual workshops, and the workshop down the road wouldn't have. But then, as I said, if your artilleryman has to draw his ruby to defend himself against attacking infantry, he's not done his job correctly.
Nor did any of the infantry that was tasked to protect the artillery.
Yes, exactly. Like German staff officers who always carried a tiny little 6.5 millimeter pistol at the back of their belt, you know, they sat down on it.
French have nuclear submarines, but last
That's why the Australians cancelled them. They cancelled the submarines.
Why would the Australians want to buy French submarines anyway?
Because the French built good submarines. But if you see how the Australians built submarines, I would never go down in any Australian submarine. And if they had a nuclear reactor in it, I would stay well away. When they built their last batch of submarines, it took them about 15 years to get them to work. And then they had to limit them to diving depths because pipes used to burst and try to flood the submarine. And they found that all the propellers they'd handmade didn't work. They made very noisy propellers. They had to take them all off, scrap them, and get somebody in America, I think it was, to cut them on a machine.
No kidding. Yeah, no kidding.
And one of the propellers, they found that some idiot had hand cut it with the pitch was wrong. If they'd gone full ahead, it would have gone astern. It's just building a nuclear submarine. Thank you very much.
I heard the Scottish are building a nuclear submarine.
When they break away from the UK.
In order to break away.
Oh, come on, imagine the Irish building a nuclear submarine. No, you don't need that. That's even better thinking about.
Well, we are on some satellite internet, but
French internet sucks.
Okay. The Kamala question I got was why Kamala was not in charge. If Kamala was not of the German Reich, because he was quite few behind Himmler and Göring, and he wasn't that high up in that sense. He had practical power. He had practical knowledge. He did things. He was an SS general. But, well, I guess if the war had lasted longer and Hitler had died in Berlin, he could eventually have knocked over a Himmler and a Göring with his power and within the SS. But I don't think he was an operator. He was an engineer. He was not a political animal that was trying to take over the country. That's why Kamala was not in charge. That's why. That's like Himmler. I don't think Himmler would have absolutely.
The Collins class was doing it.
What was the Collins class?
It's the submarines built in Australia.
Oh, sure, they are actually building a submarine? I thought we were kidding about that.
No, that was the last batch. It took them 15 years to get them to work.
I should say there's only once. Kamala was he was an engineer who was put in charge of all the German secret weapons projects and the jet fighters towards at the end of the war, and he oversaw all the special weapons programs. So he had knowledge. He knew everything that was going on in Germany. He had the power to command anybody and anything he wanted, but to take over the actual country as a leader, I actually don't think that was within his interest of ambition. I don't even think Himmler wanted to take over the country unless something had happened to Hitler and he would have had a chance. But I think Himmler was perfectly happy being the number two guy
Well, he was head of the SAS with his castle built at what was supposed to be the center of the universe. Yeah. His astrologer had told him, "I'm happy with that sort of rubbish."
They still don't want to talk to me. Bugatti was made in France. Oh, we just talked about Spain. That Spain was somewhat involved with their radio stations and in the Canary Islands. If they're still, I haven't watched the news for a while, as you know, so I don't know if the Canary Islands are still there. I know they were dealing with a whole bunch of
the volcanic
and
yeah. Well, they're saying if that blew its top, it would cause a lot of devastation worldwide.
Well, we have raining. Can we blame that on the Canary Islands?
And our satellite connection cuts out. That's the canary.
Lady blah blah. When you want to come shoot guns, you come see me out in we'll go out in Nevada and we'll shoot some guns.
Well, I'll tell you something about. Oh yeah, I'll tell you something
right?
about French cars. I own a 32-year-old Renault Espace, and although the paintwork on the plastic bodywork is, well,
yes, it is
terrible and needs repainting, the chassis galvanized in zinc is as good as it was when it left the factory 32 years ago. Yes, the French build good cars. Thank you very much.
It could be a submarine.
Yeah, galvanized in zinc.
Yeah,
it would never rust, would it? That's true. Good idea.
well, we can try to float your car down the Seine tomorrow.
Yeah.
Bugatti.
Is it?
Canary Islands is still there.
It was built in
But
France.
it's still erupting. Because there are submarine pens in the Canary Islands that I would like to see at some point.
Oh.
I want to visit there. It's just I can't go there just yet because that was my last holiday with my mom. And she loved the Canary Islands. She lived there so for many years.
Yeah.
So go. I'm not ready to not even to look at submarine bunkers. I'll go there. I'll go there one day if it's still there. Peter, you're coming back now that we're thinking about it's time to call it a night before the internet kills us again, and we got to go film some things tomorrow. That's very early, but what about the submarine pens in Spain? Canary Islands was under Spanish control, but yes, there also were docking stations in Spain. This was a radio station in Spain. There's actually German war graves in Spain, although they're doing quite a bit of a job to cover them up. You can still see the swastikas and behind the walls.
Oh, how naughty.
The Spanish did help it out a little bit. No, one of the Swiss, they helped out a little bit too, but they're not going to admit to it.
No, the Swiss was surrounded by the Nazis. The Swiss knew that the Germans could cut off the supply of coal in the winter, and Switzerland would cave in in about 3 weeks. Because as a Swiss friend said to me, in Switzerland we have two natural resources, rocks and water. Everything else they have to make. That's how they live, by their technology.
So money is not a Swiss resource?
Well, they took in anybody's money and anybody's gold and anybody's paintings. Yeah, that was very naughty. But don't forget, the Germans made 3 plans to invade and crush Switzerland. The last one by the SS.
I know, and Schellenberg actually was the one that quenched it, according to Schellenberg.
If you visit a Swiss fortress, you sit down with no barriers, off the edge of the road down a ravine, and you get to the fortress, and facing you is a rock face, and then the wall slides apart. It's like in a James Bond movie, and you go in through the airlock, you go in through the nuclear lock, you go in through the gas lock, and you're in the fortress. And when you go down the long tunnels, you get to the gun battery facing out of the other side of the mountain, and that guards a pass coming up from Italy. And you've got a long-barreled 105 gun, and you can practice loading it, and you have great fun with the thing. All the shells still hanging around.
Yes,
if a Tiger tank comes up the valley, your first round will knock its turret clean off, because when they installed the cannons, they sent a group of men with a white blanket rolled up all the way down the valley. They went a couple of miles down the valley. They climbed all the way up the mountain facing them, and they laid the white sheet out with stones in the field. Then they radioed back. They said, well, we've moved aside. You can fire your first test shot. The gun fired. And the fortress phoned up and said, where did it go? And they said, right through the middle of the white sheet. So a Tiger tank's turret, knock 105 will take its turret clean off.
So, and we actually have
solid armor piercing shot.
We did talk about having to go to Switzerland and look at some of the forts up there. So we're going to do that when it gets a little warmer. And we are apparently also going to visit the NATO underground headquarters in Italy on the other side. And there's something I wanted to ask you, since I can override everyone else's questions and jump ahead of line.
Right.
How is that? My channel is a dictatorship. I run. the Italians apparently built bunkers and forts, fortified lines facing Germany in the Alps, and didn't stop building them until 1943. Why?
That's interesting. Yeah, 'cause I knew the ones they built facing France,
But they kept building them facing Germany all the way up in 42 until Hitler finally told Mussolini to knock it off.
Unless they thought
According to themselves.
Allies, unless they thought the Allies were going to come back into France and then invade Italy through south of Germany.
Now, I will also say that, of course, this was the explanation of an official Italian historian who would like to remember history in the fact that, Italy was not
they were
allied
really the
with
good
Germany.
guys. Oh.
I keep thinking, but there were bunkers and they were facing Germany, and I did see them. I couldn't get into them because they lied on their website, which they do all the time. That's what I'm thinking.
The Italians suffered very badly in World War II, let's face it. I mean, people tell the jokes, the smallest book in the world is the book of Italian war heroes. Well, it's very cruel to say that. They also say, as we laughed with Tino today, the Italian tanks made of papier-mâché in the Western Desert. 2 forward gears and 5 reverse gears. Well, yeah, if I had a tank like that, I'd want more reverse gears than forward gears. But there were great Italian heroes. The Mass 10. They sunk the York with an exploded motor boat. They sank 2 British battleships at Alexandria, put them out of action.
These things.
Yeah, when they really, their best guys were on top of everything. Now,
are you talking about the one in Italy? Because I actually get permission to get into the NATO underground one in Italy. Unless you're talking about another one. There's also one not far from Strasbourg or Frankfurt. There's one on the other side of the German border that I may visit. If I can get a hold of them, I can also get on that. Are there any others that... not that I would ever consider going into anything that they wouldn't let me into. That would be so far removed for me to cross the line to Southampton. I never do anything like that.
Well, like this one about the Swiss.
Swiss reservists. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the great story. Behind every legend, there's always a little glimmer of truth. And the legend is that, was it in World War I? Probably World War II. There's a German officer smoking a cigarette, leaning over a border fence, facing his Swiss opposite number. And the German, it's World War II, yeah. The German says, I don't know why you're keeping building these fortresses. I don't know why you're keeping resisting coming in and joining with us. You know that we've got a force of men ready to invade Switzerland, which is 3 times greater than your entire army. And the Swiss guy just puffed on his cigarette and said, well, in that case, each one of us will have to fire 3 times and then go home. And they do it as well, I know the Swiss. They're very determined. You don't know what they did with the German Leopard tank. I must tell you, the Swiss built their Dragon's Teeth from one side of the narrow valley to the other. Yes. Oh, yes, yes. And every time it crossed the road, there was like a portable barrier kept in a locker. And the guy's job was to come out, undo the lock, and several men would lift this portable barrier into the sockets in the road. And the same thing with the railway line, to block the whole valley. Lines of Dragon's Teeth, 2 or 3 lines of Dragon's Teeth. Brilliant. And the Germans came along with their brand new Leopard tank. They wanted to sell to the Swiss army. And they said, all this rubbish, our Leopard tank will knock that over. It would just run at them, smash them to pieces, and there'd be no use at all. And the Swiss put their hands behind their backs.
Relatively recent Leopard tank. We're not talking about that. We're talking about
yeah. The recent one they would have said the Swiss. And the Swiss army officers put their hands behind their back and looked nonchalant and said, well, in that case, we wanted to demolish these damn things that get in the way of the farmer. Spoke to one of the officers who was a witness of this, so I can guarantee it. Please bring one of your brand new Leopard tanks and show us how to knock over these Dragon's Teeth. So the Germans proudly, and they ran full speed at the first line of Dragon's Teeth. But instead of damaging them, the tank was thrown up in the air, its tracks were ripped off, and it landed in the middle of the lines of Dragon's Teeth, sort of gently balancing in the air. At that very moment, armored traps slid aside at the side of the valley, and anti-tank guns poked out, aiming at the leopard tank. The Germans were furious. They jumped up and down with rage, and they said, "What the hell have you done to us? How did you do that?" And this said, "Oh, damn, we forgot to tell you. These are not just concrete Dragon's Teeth set in the ground. They are set in sockets in a reinforced concrete line which goes from one side of the valley to the other, and they're all interconnected in one line with the other." But they just wanted to embarrass the Germans, and they did it in a big way. Oh, what a laugh they must have had.
Yeah, no,
I don't think they even laughed, the Swiss. They just sort of smiled slightly.
I don't know. The Swiss did laugh a lot. I don't remember. Well, that was a question for you. And if we lose connection again, we're going to call it just so you know.
Interviewed Captain Peter Mace with SS. I must have. Oh, does Roger know anything about the SS looking for Nazis after the war? No, I don't know about that, because the SAS was officially disbanded at the end of World War II. My cousin, who was a lieutenant in 4 Group SAS, and I've written his memoirs up, I've written a book about it, he was asked by his colonel to stay on. He spent some time in Paris dating a French girl and learning how to paint, of all things, after blowing things up. He was the gelignite minister. We yes, officially, but we need you to go to Palestine. And he even got the Palestine medal after saying, "I went to Palestine." They said, "There's no record of you being there." And then his commanding officer, so he got the Palestine medal.
So chasing Nazis in Palestine.
So chasing Nazis
in Palestine.
As I say, they didn't officially exist after World War II until they were reinstated many years later.
And also, it wasn't that many years after the war until everybody stopped looking for Nazis to prosecute and started looking for Nazis to hire.
Oh, well, they started that
before the war. They started before the war ended, yeah.
Yes. Well, there were these sort of, what are the wolf gangs? What do they call them? The German stay-behinds. There was a bit
werewolves.
The werewolves, right?
Werewolves,
yeah, there were people who were a bit worried about them coming out of hiding and causing.
They should be more worried about the ones who were left with all the money and all the assets.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, it's now whatever clock it is now. We have to get up early in the morning.
Yes.
We're going to do this some more, and I'm going to insist that he sets up his own YouTube and do a Q&A with you guys. When I'm not here, when I'm not crawling around through strange tunnels. And all your books are on Amazon.
Yes. Roger Brantford Cook. Look me up.
Well,
and several ebooks. And my very first book I wrote was an alternative history of World War II. And many people said that's complete crap because it mentions the word French and they're rubbish. And then everybody else read it and said, yeah, that's very thoughtful. That might have happened. Could have worked.
Alternative story involving the French. The French could be involved.
The French were the fourth greatest, biggest navy in the world and the most modern. How could they have done anything with that? They were useless. You go and ask the Thais what they did with their ships. They flattened them.
Well, the Russians in 1805.
Yeah. The French have one of the biggest navies in the world at the moment because they have the largest coastal areas because of all the little islands. So they've got all these coastal areas to protect. They've got a big navy to go and patrol the world.
One day I want to figure out how to do photos. I got to get you and Drakenfeld on together and talk about ships.
Oh, ships.
I'll just make coffee.
The Bismarck, the greatest battleship in the world. What a load of rubbish. I could tell you which one was the greatest battleship in the world, designed specifically with British help to hunt down and run down and put down the mighty KM Bismarck. And she was French. That's going to start the World War III.
The Richelieu?
The Richelieu.
The Richelieu.
Yeah. Everything that she all of her features were put together to run down and sink the Bismarck.
The Richelieu was sunk by the British, wasn't it?
No, she wasn't.
That wasn't
Her
El
sister's
Kabir.
ship. Yeah, the Bretagne was sunk by the British in.
What happened to the Richelieu?
Actually, lasted into the 1960s.
It did. It made it.
Yeah. And her sister's ship, the Jean Bart, was bombarded by the Americans. She only had one main.
Back to the Americans.
Yes,
the Americans bombing up.
Yeah, French battleship, sink it.
I wonder why Americans are like less and less allies. They keep blowing. All right, you guys.
Okay. We leave the Richelieu argument. I can defend everything I say.
Well, I'm not going to really argue with you. I didn't even remember it wasn't sunk. I thought it had lost it. Which, by the way, is a really good episode that Jackie did on Mercy Al Kabir. It was an interesting story how that could have made a lot different. It could have gone a lot different to talk to Somerset. But he was
Somerville.
He was below him in rank, so he couldn't be bothered to meeting with him.
When he was married to an English wife, so Somerville was bullied into opening fire because he'd been thrown out of the Royal Navy before the war with tuberculosis, and Churchill had personally interceded to bring Somerville back into admiral rank. So when Churchill said, "Fire on the damned French ships, or you'll have to deal with reinforcements," Somerville obeyed blindly. When I wrote my alternate history, when I imagined I was beside Somerville on the bridge, I told him what my opinion was that we should have done at the Battle of Mers el Kabir, but before the Battle of Mers el Kabir. And if he'd followed my advice,
Alternative advice,
going back is 2020 hindsight, right? If I'd been there and he'd followed my advice, and everything would have changed, the whole history of the world might have changed. And when I wrote my book, I was pleased that I could have cut 9 months off World War II and saved millions of people. And then I was damned upset that I wasn't there to have been able to do it. And these people died for nothing. And when I looked up some biographical details of Admiral Sir James Somerville, I was completely stunned because he died the very day I was born. Work out how that happens. And the idea of writing this history to put right what he screwed up. It was like, if only I'd done something else. And finally, when I was born,
Somerville didn't speak French, and he sent a lower-ranking captain to negotiate with the French
Captain of the Ark Royal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the French admiral's name, who eludes me right now.
Jean Soult.
The charge of the French.
Yeah, Jean Soult.
He couldn't get orders, but he wouldn't meet. He wouldn't meet with the captain because he was below him in rank. So they couldn't really negotiate. It was a communication thing. To be a lot of it was miscommunication or deliberate.
You have to. Version. I wrote a volume as an ebook. Don't read the French one either. Some Frenchmen helped me to translate it, and they did terrible work, and it turned out badly. And I'm going to redo that.
Sean Soult, yeah, those.
Yeah, but A Moment of Destiny, second edition ebook,
right.
And a lot of people have said, "Damn, if only that had worked out like that."
Oh, well, we can go back in time and fix a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
All right, you guys.
build me a time machine. I'll go back. History will change,
I know,
and I won't be here to build the time machine. Shut.
Before we get cut off by whatever it is that is cutting us off here.
Sandstorms or whatever.
Yeah, we know we're at a mercy of whatever internet and weather's going on here. I'm coming up through Holland, and I will see you guys. I'll see what I got for you Friday if I can find an upload. But since we keep cutting out, I'll see you guys and you will see us
I know he's right.
next time we're plugged in.
I like that message. Yeah, pizza. Yeah. Bye,
Yeah,
Tino,
no.
Mr. Goodbye.
All right, you guys, you take care.
Bye, guys and gals.